As I pulled into the hospital parking lot for my inaugural night shift, the old building loomed ahead like a slumbering giant. Its weathered brick facade and shadowy windows appeared to observe my every step. I inhaled deeply, gripping my new security badge tightly, as though it were my only connection to safety. This gig was meant to be a breeze, but the unease churning in my gut suggested a different story. The automatic doors glided open silently, each sound resonating like thunder in the haunting quiet. "Hello," I called, my voice barely above a whisper, tinged with uncertainty. No response came. I approached the security office, a chill creeping up my spine. A nagging sensation lingered, as if unseen eyes were upon me. The night guard, soon to be succeeded by a cantankerous old man named Frank, hardly glanced up from his newspaper when you announced that you must be the new recruit. You'll need it before I can inquire about what he meant. Frank vanished, leaving me solitary with the array of security monitors and an escalating feeling of unease. I sank into the old office chair, my gaze drifting across the grainy black and white images on the screens, revealing nothing but vacant hallways and shadowy rooms. The initial hours of my shift unfolded smoothly, without any disruptions. I navigated my path, illuminating doors and windows with the beam of my flashlight, cutting through the shadows of the night. The aged hospital stood as a labyrinth of contorted hallways and deserted sections, each more eerie than the previous. As I rounded the corner, I held my breath, anticipation coursing through me, ready to encounter whatever lurked in the shadows. Just past midnight, a gentle rhythmic tapping echoed through the corridor. Tap, tap, tap. My heart pounded with excitement. As I cautiously advanced toward the sound, my hand hovering over the pepper spray on my belt, the tapping intensified as I neared a door marked with the X-ray plaque. I paused, my hand resting on the knob. The tapping ceased suddenly, and the silence stretched on for what felt like forever. Just as I was about to turn back, a woman's voice slipped through the door. Through the dimly lit door, I nearly overlooked it. A chill gripped me as I fumbled for the right key with trembling hands. At last, the bolt clicked open, and I pushed the door wide, illuminating the empty room with the beam of my flashlight. Dusty filing cabinets and old X-ray machines filled the space. My heart raced as I scanned every corner, finding no evidence of life for years. Just as I turned to leave, a flicker of movement caught my eye. I quickly redirected my flashlight to a large mirror on the back wall. For a fleeting moment, I could have sworn I saw a figure behind me, a woman in an old-fashioned nurse's uniform, her face etched with despair. Yet, as I glanced over my shoulder, I found myself alone. I rushed back to the security office, slamming the door shut behind me, my hands trembling with adrenaline. I was so overwhelmed that I could hardly pick up the phone. When Jade finally answered, she said, "I think I just saw a ghost." There was a long pause on the other line. "So, you met the nurse?" "Rachel," Frank said quietly. "I hoped she wouldn't show up to you on your first night." For the next hour, Frank recounted the grim history of the hospital, a sick decade in the 1950s spent caring for patients in the now-abandoned TB ward, where many died under mysterious circumstances. Since then, sightings of her ghost had been reported, still trying to tend to patients who had long since disappeared. I wanted to laugh, to tell Frank he was crazy, but I couldn't shake the image of that woman in the mirror, her eyes filled with sadness and despair. The rest of my shift passed in a haze of anxiety and extreme vigilance. Every shadow seemed to move, and every creak of the old building made me jump. By the time dawn broke, I was a bundle of nerves as I gathered my things to leave. A soft voice behind me made me freeze. "You saw it, you saw it." I turned to meet the gaze of an old janitor, his wise eyes watching me intently. The nurse, Rachel, nodded. "It's not the only one, you know. This place is full of lost souls." As time passed, I realized he was correct. The hospital transformed at night, teeming with whispers, footsteps, and the fleeting shadows of vanishing figures. As I attempted to focus on them, I noticed a child dressed in 1920s attire, joyfully playing with a ball in the pediatric ward. An elderly man roamed the oncology department, softly muttering to himself. And there was always Nurse Rachel, observing me with her piercing gaze. Initially, I experienced feelings of sadness and fear, but over time, I found an unexpected connection with these lost souls. They were not evil, merely bewildered and ensnared. In the midst of two worlds, I initiated a conversation, acknowledging their presence. To my astonishment, the atmosphere in the hospital began to shift. The heavy weight of terror lifted, giving way to a quiet melancholy. One night, a month into my work, I heard the sound of someone crying. I followed the sound to the old tuberculosis ward, a place I had previously avoided. There stood Nurse Rachel, her eyes widening in surprise as she noticed my entrance. "You can see me?" she whispered, and I nodded, my throat tight with emotion. "I have been able to see you for a long time," I confessed. Rachel's face contorted as she began to sob. "I've been here for so long," she stammered. "I couldn't leave them, my patients, but they're gone, right?" I settled beside her, feeling the chill radiating from her spectral form. "Yes," I said gently, "they're gone, but you don't have to remain here any longer." Rachel gazed at me, her eyes reflecting a blend of hope and trepidation. "What's the process?" She spoke softly. The words slipped from my lips, unfiltered and spontaneous. "Release it," I advised her. "Your responsibilities have concluded. Now it's time to embrace the next chapter." In that brief instant, silence reigned. Gradually, Ratch started to disappear, a smile blossoming on his face. The first person to catch sight of him whispered, "Thank you." After that night, he vanished, and everything transformed gradually. The other spirits began to fade away. The little boy found his long-lost mother, and the old man finally discovered peace. Within months, the hospital fell into a profound silence for the first time in decades. On my last night, I made my final rounds, a bittersweet feeling swelling in my chest as I walked past the radiology department. I ceased to recall that initial, frightening encounter. On a whim, I opened the door and moved toward the mirror. My reflection gazed back at me, but I was no longer the frightened and uncertain girl who had begun that journey. Now, in my eyes, I recognized a strength and wisdom I hadn't realized I possessed before I turned around. As I prepared to leave, I could have sworn I caught a glimpse of Nurse Rachel smiling at me from the edge of the mirror. Yet, when I turned to look again, all that remained was my own reflection. That night, as I stepped out of the hospital, I felt a profound sense of accomplishment. I hadn't merely observed an old structure. I had guided wandering spirits back to their rightful place, and in that process, I unearthed a resilience within me that I had never realized was there. They shut the door behind them. I whispered softly, inhaling the cool night air as the old hospital loomed silently behind me, its windows dark and empty. Instead of fear, a sense of peace enveloped me. The ghosts that once haunted these halls were finally at rest. As I drove away, a smile crept across my face. My time as a night guard had proven far more challenging than I ever anticipated, yet it transformed me in ways I could never have imagined. Glancing in the rearview mirror, I watched the hospital fade into the distance, knowing that no matter where my journey led, I was prepared to confront it head-on. The scent of freshly cut grass and new paint filled the air as I observed the moving truck depart from the house next door on our quiet residential street. It had been years since I had seen any new neighbors, and I felt the weight of that absence. With an unexpected thrill at the thought of change, I was unaware that this seemingly harmless occurrence would lead to a nightmare, engulfing our tranquil community. It's vivid in my mind. The day I first encountered him was a balmy Saturday afternoon. I found myself on the front lawn, wrestling with the unruly hedges when a shadow fell across the grass. Glancing up, I spotted a man standing at the boundary of my property. "Hello, neighbor," greeted me in a cheerful voice, but there was something about the tone that rubbed me the wrong way. "My name is Carl. I just moved in next door." I stood up straight, wiped my hands on my jeans, and extended one to shake yours with enthusiasm. "Carl, my name is Lisa." As our hands touched for the very first time, I truly saw him. He was unremarkable in every way. Average height, average build, brown hair, and thin, watery blue eyes. Yet, there was an undeniable quality to those eyes that compelled me to retreat, their intensity and unwavering gaze reminiscent of a predator assessing its next target. I scolded myself for my paranoia. "Welcome to the neighborhood," I said, mustering a smile. "What have your feelings been like up to this point?" Carl scanned the row of houses, but his gaze was drawn irresistibly to the Andersons' home, where his children frolicked in the garden. "Oh, it's simply perfect," he remarked, his tone suggesting he hadn't quite focused on what he was searching for. We continued our conversation for a few more minutes, sharing friendly remarks, but as Carl prepared to depart, he hesitated and cast a glance my way, his expression a puzzle I couldn't quite unravel. "Do you have kids?" Lisa posed the question with a casual air, yet her eyes were piercing. A shiver coursed through me as I responded slowly. What made Carl shrug, his smile growing even broader? "Oh, I absolutely adore children. Their innocence is truly something special, wouldn't you agree?" With that, he turned and walked away, leaving me rooted in place, an unsettling feeling churning in my stomach. In the weeks that followed, I found myself wrestling with doubt, trying to convince myself that I was overreacting. Carl appeared friendly, always offering a wave as we crossed paths on the street, yet I couldn't shake the unsettling feeling that something was amiss with him. Everything began with the little things. I observed him gazing at our house from his window, swiftly withdrawing when he realized he had been seen. He consistently appeared to be outside whenever the neighborhood kids were playing, generously offering candy or inviting them to check out the amazing toys in his garage. My husband, Mike, believed he was embarrassing himself. "Oh, he's just a friendly neighbor," he remarked, rolling his eyes. "Not everyone exhibits bullying behavior." "Lisa, then the incident occurred with Sarah. Our 10-year-old daughter came home from school with a pale face and trembling hands," Mom whispered, her eyes filled with fear, as she recounted how Mr. Carl tried to get her into his house. "Today, Sarah mentioned she had a puppy she wanted to show me, but then she froze." I asked, trying to remain calm while panic gripped my throat, "What happened?" Sarah shook her head and said, "I told him no and ran away, but Mom looked so angry when I did. That was the last straw. I called the police immediately, but without concrete evidence of a crime, they couldn't do much." "Stay tuned," the officer said in a neutral voice, "and call us if anything happens again." Since that day, I haven't taken my eyes off Carl. I accompanied Sarah and her younger brother, Tommy. Each morning and afternoon, I made my way to the bus stop, alerting the other parents in the neighborhood. Some took notice of my warnings. People regarded me as though I was overreacting. Weeks went by. Carl grew increasingly reserved, venturing out only to collect his mail or tend to his pristine garden. I started to question my own thoughts. Perhaps I had misjudged the situation. Maybe my concerns about Carl were unfounded. And then arrived the night that transformed everything. The clock had struck midnight, and sleep eluded me. As I made my way downstairs for a refreshing glass of water, a flicker of motion caught my eye through the window of our room, drawing my attention to the back garden. I stood still, paralyzed. Carl stood there, gazing intently at Sarah's window. I can't recall making my way down the stairs. I have no recollection of opening the back door. Moreover, I suddenly found myself standing there in front of him, my heart pounding fiercely in my chest. "What on earth are you up to?" I unleashed my words, my voice quaking with a mix of fury and trepidation. Carl turned gradually, and under the soft glow of the moonlight, I caught a clear glimpse of his face for the very first time. The facade of compassion had settled into position. A dark, insatiable hunger lurked beneath the surface, compelling me to instinctively retreat a step. "You don't understand," he murmured, his voice trembling with emotion. I require them." My voice was merely a whisper. "Are you innocent?" He pressed on. His gaze, locked onto the window, beckons me closer. A chilling wave of pure dread coursed through me. I slipped my hand into the back pocket of my pants, retrieving my phone and dialing. "The 911 in silence, leave my house," I commanded, my voice steadier than my emotions suggested. "I will be contacting the authorities." Carl flashed a smile. "Nothing can hold me back." Then he launched himself toward me. A chaotic scene unfolded, filled with piercing screams, frantic footsteps, and the flashing glow of red and blue lights. The police arrived just in the nick of time. They discovered him grappling with me on the lawn, attempting to subdue him. With little regard for ceremony, they cuffed him, their expressions cold as they pulled him away from my home. It wasn't until days later that we uncovered the unsettling truth. Carl had a troubling history of offenses against minors. He was always on the move, skillfully evading the watchful eyes of the law. Our tranquil street had transformed into his new hunting ground, and soon we found ourselves becoming the targets. The subsequent days unfolded in a haze of police reports, discussions with worried neighbors, and an increasing sense of gratitude for our fortunate circumstances. Restless and anxious, I found myself unable to sleep, haunted by the chilling possibility of what could have transpired had Sarah stepped into her house that day. Yet, the neighborhood experienced a remarkable change, evolving from a previously indifferent community into one that was alert and looked out for one another. We took decisive action to safeguard ourselves, ensuring that an incident like this would never occur again. Sarah, initially shy and apprehensive, started to rediscover her confidence. Founded a school club dedicated to educating peers on safety and prevention, turned her fear into a valuable lesson for others, and I discovered the importance of trusting my instincts. This experience left a lasting impression on me. It revealed the inner strength I possessed to safeguard my mother. Sitting on the porch, watching my kids play with the neighborhood children, brings me a profound sense of peace. Carl's house stands vacant, a quiet testament to the peril we've encountered and the resilience that brought us through. We recognize that there are others like Carl, predators hiding behind friendly smiles and ordinary appearances. However, we are now more vigilant, resilient, and united than ever before. I lock eyes with Mrs. Anderson, who keeps a watchful eye on her children from on the sidewalk. We exchange a subtle nod, a silent agreement. We've transcended mere neighbors, becoming guardians of one another. The sunlight dips below the horizon as I summon my kids for dinner, their laughter echoing as they race home. For the first time in months, I feel a genuine sense of vitality. Yet, the headlights of my old Corolla cut through the darkness like sharp blades, revealing nothing but an infinite stretch of desolate road ahead. I've spent hours there. As I navigated the endless road, the only interruption to the dullness was the sporadic glow of the clock on board 237. My logical mind urged me to stop for a motel, yet I chose to push on for just a few more hours, with the promise of home on the horizon. In that moment, I spotted Hima's solitary figure on the roadside, arm extended, thumb lifted high in the timeless sign of a hitchhiker. For a brief moment, I paused before gently pressing the brake. It was perilous. I was aware of that, yet abandoning someone in the vast emptiness felt far more heartless to me. As I paused, the man's features sharpened into focus. He appeared to be in his 50s, his face marked by time and experience, with eyes that mirrored the twinkling starlight. As he drew nearer, a smile graced his lips, sending a subtle shiver coursing down my spine. "Thanks for stopping by," he said, his voice a blend of grit and warmth. Few would take that step right now. I managed to smile. "Absolutely no issue at all. Where are you headed?" "Just a bit further down the road," he responded by sliding into the passenger seat. "I'm Jack Sarah. I propose to hit the road again." Meeting Jack was a pleasure. We traveled in quietude for a time. The sole sound was the hum of the tires against the asphalt and the faint creak of a far-off radio station. I found myself stealing glances at Jack, attempting to unravel the mystery. It appeared to be innocuous. There was an elusive quality about him that I couldn't quite pinpoint, and then, out of the blue, Jack spoke, causing me to leap with excitement and share my thoughts. "Sarah, what's a girl like you doing out here driving solo at this hour?" I paused, selecting my words with precision. "I'm heading home from college now. I finally got back to you. Additionally, I aim to delight my parents with a surprise." Jack gave a slight nod, a subtle smile playing on his lips. Ah, the days of youth, how vividly they linger in my memory. "Your parents are sure to be thrilled to see you. It's time to unwind." They gripped the steering wheel tightly. "Could you repeat that?" Jack beamed, his grin revealing an abundance of teeth. "Ah, that cake your mom used to whip up as a warm welcome after school, with a sprinkle of cinnamon on top." My heart raced at the thought. I had never brought up my mother's baking. I had never discussed apple pie. "What makes you certain of that?" I murmured, striving to maintain a steady tone. Jack emitted a soft, amused chuckle. "It's clear that you have a lot on your mind, from your recent calculus test results to thoughts about your relationship. What is the name of that individual?" "Oh yes, Matthew," a chilling wave coursed through my body. This couldn't be real. How is it possible that this stranger possesses such personal insights into my life? "Can you tell me who you are?" I insisted, my voice quivering with emotion. "What is it that you desire?" Jack underwent a complete transformation. His expression shifted to one of darkness, and his gaze took on a predatory intensity. "Halt! Refrain from whispering to the accelerator." The speedometer climbed to 70, 80, and 90 miles per hour, approximately 145 kilometers per hour. "I asked you to stop, didn't I?" With a grunt, Jack lunged for the steering wheel. I let out a scream, pivoting quickly. The car's tires screeched as Aaron lay on the pavement for a heart-stopping moment. I expected us to give in, but unexpectedly, I took charge without a second thought. I slammed on the brakes and launched myself out of the car behind me. I caught Jack muttering under his breath as he wrestled with his belt. I sprinted with a speed I had never experienced before. My lungs ached. My legs propelled me forward as if my very existence hinged on it, leaving no chance to escape from myself. Sarah's voice resonated behind me, drawing nearer and nearer. "I will always seek you out." As I glanced back, regret washed over me. Jack had lost all semblance of humanity. His face twisted and reshaped, transforming into something truly monstrous. I released my grip. A submerged Soyuz loomed ahead, where I spotted lights, a gas station, a beacon of hope. Just before I reached my destination, I tripped and took a hard tumble on the gravel. I maneuvered on my ESP, retreating as Jack loomed above me. "Kindly speak softly. I beg you, do not cause me harm." His grin grew broader. "Oh, Sarah." I emit a soft purr. "I assure you, I mean you no harm. Additionally, I will reverse it." As he lifted his hand, it morphed into a claw, accompanied by a booming horn and a dazzling flash of light that compelled him to turn. A trailer was approaching us. Jack took a moment to stop and reflect. "Kindly make your way to the truck." The driver came to a sudden halt. "You're doing just fine, miss." I reached out to indicate Jack, only to find he had vanished. The truck driver, a gentle-looking man in his 60s, was adamant about contacting the police, even in the face of my objections. I sat in the cab of his truck, trembling as he relayed the situation to the 911 operator while the officers they showed up, and I shared the whole story of picking up the hitchhiker's unsettling awareness of my life, the feeling of being pursued. They listened intently, sharing glances that left me puzzled. One of the officers finally spoke up, saying, "We'll investigate this further. But, miss, are you certain she didn't doze off at the wheel? Perhaps she envisioned it." I started to speak up, but quickly decided against it. How can I convey what I witnessed? Describing the transformation of Jack's face would surely lead them to think I was losing my mind. In the end, I chose to let them hold onto their own interpretations. After my ordeal, I found myself hitchhiking to the nearest motel, desperately trying to rationalize the experience as a mere hallucination fueled by fatigue. Yet, as I lay in the lumpy motel bed, staring at the water-stained ceiling, the undeniable truth settled in. Jack, or whatever he truly was, had been all too real. Somehow, I sensed that the experience was far from finished. I must have drifted off at some point. In that instant, the sun began to filter through the curtains, illuminating the room with a warm glow. My eyes fluttered open, confusion washing over me. Memories of the previous night surged back like a powerful avalanche, leaving my hands shaking uncontrollably. I grabbed my phone. I noticed 5 missed calls from my mom and a message from Matt checking in to see if I made it home safely. With a steadying breath, I reached for my phone and dialed my mother's number. Sarah's voice was laced with urgency. "Where are you located? I've been feeling quite anxious." "Text, I'm okay, Mom," I replied, taken aback by the strength in my tone. Additionally, I encountered issues with the car. Additionally, I needed to pause for the night, but I'll be home shortly. As we chatted for a few more minutes, I felt myself unwind, drawn in by the comfort of his familiar voice. All was set to turn out perfectly. Jack disappeared within just a few hours. Home would feel secure as I fixated on the flickering screen of the vintage motel television. I felt an undeniable urge to switch it on and flip through the channels until I landed on the local news. In a developing story, authorities are probing a string of mysterious disappearances along Highway 16, the anchor reported. Every victim was a young woman journeying solo. Officials are advising everyone to exercise caution. A chill coursed through me as a haunting image flickered to life on the screen. Jack, at least it was the familiar expression I had displayed when I first grabbed it. The presenter kept talking, but his voice became a distant murmur as my focus tightened. "If you have any details about this man, I would appreciate you getting in touch with me." I switched off the TV, my hands trembling. This couldn't possibly be real. It had to be just a coincidence, didn't it? Yet, beneath the surface, I was aware that it truly wasn't. Whatever Jack was, the story was far from finished. In a twist of fate, I found myself either fortunate or unfortunate to have slipped away during the gathering. I was preparing to check out of the motel. I glimpsed my reflection in the bathroom mirror. Moreover, I appeared different, older, and marked. The girl who embarked on this journey has transformed, now embodying someone who has faced true darkness and emerged with a story to share. I inhaled deeply and straightened my posture. Uncertainty loomed ahead, yet one conviction stood firm. I would never again extend my hand to a hitchhiker. The initial raindrops kissed my face as I navigated the dense underbrush with my legs. After hours of walking, I was consumed by exhaustion. As the well-marked trail faded from view and the sun dipped below the horizon, a sense of dread washed over me with the gathering storm clouds. I had always prided myself on being an experienced hiker, yet this solo expedition into the deep Appalachian wilderness had taken a dire turn. My phone had succumbed to battery death hours earlier, and my compass spun aimlessly, leaving me disoriented and unsure of my location. The rain intensified, drenching my jacket and sending chills coursing through my body. The darkness enveloped me completely. Visibility stretched only a few yards ahead, and every tree and rock blended into an indistinguishable blur. My breath quickened, and a creeping fear began to grip me tightly. I had to remain motionless and await rescue, or keep moving and risk tumbling into a ravine. Suddenly, I caught a subtle glimmer of light filtering through the trees. A surge of hope ignited within me. I raced forward, brushing aside the branches that clawed at my skin and dodging the roots that lurked beneath, all while the light intensified around me. At last, I stepped out of the woods and beheld Lackawanna quaint, rustic gem nestled in a serene clearing. In the solitude, the windows glimmered with a cozy and inviting glow. For a fleeting moment, I experienced pure relief. I dashed to the porch and pounded on the door with force. "Hello," I shouted. I find myself in a state of confusion and require assistance. I waited, but silence lingered in the air. I knocked again, this time with more force. Quietude. A shiver ran down my spine. There was an unsettling feeling in the air. The cabin exuded a sense of occupancy. The fire crackled in the fireplace, casting flickering shadows on the walls, yet silence lingered in the air. Feeling a knot in my stomach, I reached for the doorknob. The door was ajar. The door creaked open, unveiling a space that was simple yet inviting. A table adorned with plates stood invitingly, while a chair sat slightly askew, hinting at a recent departure. The bed was neatly made, yet the blankets bore the telltale signs of recent use, hinting at a lingering presence. "Hello," I knocked once more. My voice was barely a whisper, nothing more. The storm outside grew fiercer, and the chill seeped into my very bones. I had no option but to remain here until the break of dawn. My heart raced as I shut the door and made my way to the fireplace. The comforting warmth enveloped the space, suggesting that the occupant had merely stepped out and would be back shortly. A faint, dull thud echoed from behind me. I stood still on the porch, anxiety gripping me as I worried that the wind or an unseen presence could be lurking close by. I cautiously approached the nearest window, gazing out at a landscape of trees dancing in the rain. I let out a deep breath, attempting to soothe my thoughts. However, I soon observed something intriguing. Footprints in the mud that led to the cabin, yet there were no signs of anyone leaving. A presence had slipped in and lingered. The atmosphere thickened, wrapping around me, as a deep, instinctual fear gripped my heart. I felt a presence. I was not by myself. I scanned the room, searching for any hint of movement. The bed lay disheveled, blankets in disarray. A secret occupant had taken refuge within. With each step, my heart raced, pounding so fiercely that I feared my trembling hands would betray me. I tugged at the blankets. Silence lingered. She released a quivering sigh. Perhaps it truly was crunching. I rotated the closet completely. The closet door stood slightly open, allowing a whisper of cold air to seep through. Paralyzed, I felt an overwhelming weight down my back, suffocating me. Suddenly, the door swung open, revealing a figure emerging from the shadows. It was unnaturally tall, its gaunt face devoid of lips, sporting a smile that sent chills down my spine, expression far from human. I didn't let out a sound. There was no time for that. I bolted through the door, not daring to glance back. Raindrops pelted my face as I sprinted through the trees, branches clawing at my skin, while shadows pursued me into the unknown. The river thundered in the distance, and if I could just make it across, I risked losing it with the final gasp of water I had remaining. I jumped into the icy water, the currents dragged me hard, but I didn't care. It was better to drown than to come back with that thing. I managed to reach the other bank. I crawled out of the water panting. When I looked up, the cabin was no longer there. Only dark trees and a clear void. I didn't know what it meant. I didn't want to know. I stood up and kept walking until I saw a road. When the first car appeared in the distance, I knew I had survived. The officers found me at dawn, exhausted. And in shock when I told them my story. They exchanged skeptical looks. A search team was sent to the area. But they found no huts, no fire, no footprints. Nothing. Report said the forest was completely untouched, that there was no sign of human life for miles. But I knew the truth. Something lived in that forest, something I didn't want anyone to find. And the scariest thing of all was that I had seen it that night back in my apartment. I tried to convince myself that it was all a nightmare. That I imagined it, that none of it was real. But sometimes in the early morning when the rain hits my window, I hear a slight knock, tap, 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 and in the gloom of the bathroom mirror, sometimes I think I see a smile that isn't mine. The soft creak of the baby monitor was the only sound in the dark living room as I changed the channel, trying to find something to keep me awake. It was my first night babysitting Emily at the Wilsons' house, and despite that their 4-year-old daughter was an angel, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that came over me as soon as they left. I'm Jess, a typical 16-year-old girl trying to earn some extra money, when Mrs. Wilson, my mother's co-worker, offered me the job of nanny. I gladly accepted. Her house was beautiful with modern lines and windows overlooking the back forest. But when the night and shadows spread across the lawn, those same windows began to look like huge open mouths ready to swallow me whole. I shook my head, laughing at my own imagination. Emily had gone to bed without trouble hours ago, and checked on her a couple of times. She slept soundly with her golden curls scattered on the pillow like an aloe. The clock on the mantelpiece struck 11:30 at night. Just half an hour more, and the Wilsons would be home. I can handle it. That's when I heard it, a soft giggle coming from upstairs. I froze with the remote in my hand. I had imagined it. I held my breath, straining to hear. There it was again, a little louder. This time Emily's voice. I called in a low voice, "You're awake, baby." Silence. Just another muffled laugh. I sighed and got up from the couch. Was surely playing with his toys. He would just stick his head in his room. Tell him to go back to sleep and everything would be well. As I climbed the stairs, a shiver ran down my spine. Something felt strange. The air was heavier, as if every step I took pushed me against an invisible pressure. I gently pushed the door to Emily's bedroom. "Emily, it's time for the words." Died in my throat. The bed was empty. The sheets were scrambled, as if I had left quickly. Panic invaded me as she scanned the room for any sign. I saw her. Emily was standing in the far corner of the room, her back to me, staring at the wall, laughing. A momentary relief ran through my body. "Emily, baby, you scared me. What are you doing there?" She didn't answer. She kept laughing, her little shoulders shaking with each laugh. Something in the sound made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I stepped forward. "Emily, you're all right." Slowly. So slowly that seemed to take forever. Emily turned to me. The scream that was building in my chest died at the sight of her face. Her eyes were completely black. There was no trace of white, just two dark and infinite voids. Her mouth was stretched out in an impossible smile. "Emily is not here," said a voice that was not Emily's, was deep, guttural, full of a malevolence that made me recoil immediately. I stumbled, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. This couldn't be happening. It was a nightmare. It had to be. That which looked like Emily took a step towards me, the smile never going away. "What's up?" Jay asked sweetly, mockingly. "You don't want to play?" How did I know my name? I turned and ran, closing the bedroom door. With one blow I could hear the distorted laughter echoing behind me as I went down the stairs at full speed. I had to get out of there. My trembling fingers struggled to dial the new one on my phone, but when I brought the device to my ear I only heard laughter, the lights flicker, and then they went out completely. I plunged into absolute darkness, a bland groping the wall in search of the front door. Jess hummed Emily's voice from above, "Where are you going? The fun is just beginning." I finally found the handle and pulled hard, ready to go out running to the street, but instead of the porch and driveway I came face to face with an impossible brick wall. It couldn't be. A small hand closed on my wrist with inhuman strength. I screamed, trying to get out, but Emily wouldn't let go. I said, she whispered, her voice with a laugh, "Creepy, you can't leave. We'll play all night." The next few hours were a torse of terror. Emily chased me around the house, forever one step behind me, no matter how fast I ran or where I tried to hide. The doors that should lead outside led to more rooms. The windows only showed an infinite black void. I was trapped in a nightmare house with something that wasn't a child. When dawn began to break, I found myself curled up in a corner of the living room, exhausted and shaking. Emily was in the center of the room with her head tilted, watching me with those impossible eyes. "Poor Jay muttered, "You're tired. You want to sleep." I shook my head in despair. "If you sleep, you will continue to wake up, and everything open is a bad dream. You don't want that." For a moment hope was ignited in my chest. It could be so easy, just close my eyes and wake up safe in my bed. But when I looked into her eyes I knew it was a lie. Then I heard the most beautiful sound in the world, a key turning in the lock on the front door. Emily's head turned sharply towards the sound. She didn't growl yet. "No, we haven't finished playing yet." The door opened and the Wilsons entered. "Yes, Mrs. Wilson called." I tried to shout to warn them, but no sound came out of my throat. Emily looked at me and put a finger to her lips in a gesture of silence. "This isn't over," she whispered, and in the blink of an eye she disappeared. In her place was the real Emily, rubbing her eyes sleepily. "Mommy?" Daddy asked in her completely normal childish voice. I stood there in shock as the Wilsons hugged her and thanked me for my work, paid me, and offered to take me home. I accepted in a daze, unable to process it, what had happened. As long as we turned our eyes away, the old woman noticed mine as I helped her lie down on the bed. Her grip on my arm was surprisingly strong for someone so fragile. "They come at night," she whispered, her trembling voice, "when the shadows lengthen. They whisper from the corners." I smiled calmly. attributing them to the ravings of dementia. Little did I know that those words tormented me for weeks. My name is Sarah, and I had been working as a nurse for about 6 months. On the night shift at Oakwood Nursing Home, it wasn't the most glamorous job, but she paid the bills and really enjoyed taking care of the residents. Most nights were quiet, administering medication, checking vital signs, and occasionally soothing a confused patient back to sleep. Mrs. Adler was one of our new residents, admitted just a few weeks ago. She was in her 80s, with white hair, and her medical history pointed to dementia and moments of lucidity so surprising that I was always caught off guard that night as I tucked her in. Her warning about shadows and whispers sent a shiver down my spine, reminding myself that it was a common occurrence with demented patients. Yet as I made my rounds through the dimly lit hallways, I couldn't shake the restlessness that had settled in me. The night progressed, and I found myself startled, creaking and groaning from the old building. Around 2 in the morning, I was at the nurse's station, catching up on paperwork, when I heard it, a barely audible whisper came from the hallway. I stood up and looked into the darkness. "Hello," I knocked softly, not wanting to wake the residents. No response. I grabbed my flashlight and walked slowly down the corridor. The ace of light was cutting the gloom as the whispers intensified. As I approached room 237, Mrs. Adler's, my heart pounded as I pushed open the door. Mrs. Adler was sitting on the bed, her eyes wide open and fixed in the far corner of the room. She turned her head toward me, her face a mask of terror. "They're here," she whispered in a trembling voice. "You don't see them." I swept the room with the flashlight, waiting to find someone there, but the room was empty. "There's no one here, Mrs. Adler," I said softly, approaching her bed. "It's safe. It was just a nightmare." She grabbed my arm tightly, her nails digging into my skin. "I don't know, they hide when you look at them directly, but they're there in the shadows waiting." I managed to calm her down and make her fall asleep again, but her words stayed etched in my mind. As I left her room, I swore I saw something, seen in my peripheral vision, a dark figure sliding down the corner of the hallway. But when I turned my head, there was nothing. The rest of the night passed without incident, although the feeling of being watched never disappeared. When the morning shift came, I was more than ready to go home. In the following weeks, the strange events became more and more important. Frequent objects seemed only to reappear in unusual places. Residents who used to sleep soundly began to complain of nightmares, and there were always whispers. I tried to rationalize old buildings make noises. Patients with dementia often have hallucinations, but deep down I knew something was not right. It all culminated in a stormy night, a month after Mrs. Adler's warning. The electricity had been cut off, and we were running on generators. Back up, the dim emergency lighting cast twisted shadows on the walls. I was making my rounds when I heard a scream coming from Mrs. Adler's room. I ran my heart down my throat and pushed open the door. I found her cowered in a corner, pointing with a trembling hand towards her bed. "They are taking him away," she shouted. "They are taking Mr. Johnson." Mr. Johnson was the resident of the next room, a kind old man who had been in the asylum for years. I tried to calm her down by assuring her that he was okay, but he was inconsolable. Then the lights flickered, and for a brief second I saw them, dark figures writhing around Mr. Johnson's bed through the half-open door of his room, blinking, and they had disappeared. But the image was etched in my mind. I ran to Mr. Johnson's room. I was in his bed, but something was wrong. His eyes were wrong. Open, fixed on the ceiling, his mouth frozen in a silent scream. With trembling fingers, I looked for his pulse. Nothing. Mr. Johnson was dead. The official cause was heart failure, but I knew the truth. Something had taken him that night, something lurking in the shadows and whispering in the dark. The next day I resigned. I couldn't go back to Oakwood. My companions were surprised. How to explain what I had seen? They would think I was, but Mrs. Adler knew when I was leaving. She looked at me from her doorstep. "Now you've seen them," she said softly. "You know I'm not crazy in you." Unable to speak, "Be careful," warned. "Once they know you can see them, they'll come for you too." Those words have haunted me ever since. I moved, tried to start over, but I can't escape the feeling that I'm being watched. Some nights when the wind howls and the branches scratch my window, I hear whispers in the dark corners of my room, and I wonder how long it will be before they come for me. The cabin key was strangely heavy in my hand as I stood on the porch surrounded by dense forest and the distant song of Los Grillos. On farewell weekend, my best friend's maiden flight had been cancelled at the last minute, leaving me with a non-refundable reservation and an unexpected solo getaway. When I pushed open the wooden door, a chill ran down my spine. I had always considered myself independent, but as soon as I stepped into the dim light inside, I knew something wasn't right. The cabin looked cozy, a wood-beamed ceiling, a stone fireplace. But the air inside had a strange weight, as if I was burdened with an invisible presence. I shook off the feeling, determined to enjoy my time alone. I lit the fireplace, opened a bottle of wine, and curled up on the couch with my mystery novel. Everything was calm until midnight. It was then that I heard a soft scratch coming from outside. I put the book down, holding my breath. The sound came back louder, as if something was scratching the wood of the cabin. Surely only a raccoon, you murmur at the window, and I looked out. At first I saw nothing, only my own reflection looking back at me. Then something, a dark shadow, darker than the night itself, moved swiftly through the trees. I recoiled, my heart hammering against my ribs. Only my imagination, only my imagination. But then came another sound, a dull thud on the porch, followed by deliberate heavy footsteps. I stood paralyzed in the center of the cabin, with my mind running in circles. There were no neighbors, there was no signal on my cell phone. I was completely alone, or at least that's what I had thought. The sound of footsteps surrounding the cabin made me hold my breath. They moved slowly, as if the thing out there was savoring the moment, evaluating it. From the cabin I would be trapped. I ran to the front door and made sure of it, the doorknob. Then I checked the windows, making sure they were closed. When I finished, the cabin was quiet, too quiet. I barely had time to catch my breath when something new broke the calm. A knock on the bedroom window. Tap, tap, tap. The sound was rhythmic, insistent, as if the thing out there knew I was listening to every knock. It was a needle of ice digging into my spine. I finally mustered up the courage to move. With my muscles tense, I advanced cautiously towards the room. The tapping stopped. Only the wind and the rain broke the silence. Then a deep, sandy, inhuman voice. "I can see you in there, little mouse." I froze. The voice came from just outside the house. My knees almost gave way. "Why don't you go out to play?" murmured the voice in a mocking tone. I didn't answer. I didn't even breathe. But the thing out there, I knew it was there. I didn't whisper, just a trickle of air escaping from my lips. "That's fine." The voice went on, as if it was having fun with me. "I have all night." The noise of metal scraping glass roused me out of a trance. I was trying to open the window. I ran back to the living room, desperately looking for something to defend myself with. My eyes fell on the fireplace. I grabbed the poker with both hands, feeling its cold, metallic weight. I forced myself to take a deep breath. If I wanted to go in, I'd have to go over me. The scratches on the window stopped. The silence came back, and then the footsteps came back, this time heading for the door. The doorknob shook once, then a sharp bang made the wood creak. I was trying to force in. My heart was pounding so hard it hurt. If the door gave way, it would be the end. Another shaking, then a pause. "Come on, little mouse," I crooned. The voice from the other side, "Let me in." I didn't answer. I squeezed the poker harder. Another shake, another pause. The sound of rain and crackling fire seemed unreal around me. And then the cabin fell completely silent. No more bumps, no more scratches, no more footsteps, just the wind blowing against the walls. And worst of all, I knew I was still there, waiting. I held my breath with every fiber of my on high alert. 1 minute, 2, 3, nothing. And then from the living room window, right in front of me, 2 bright eyes were staring at me from the darkness, smiling. I screamed. It was instinctive, the reflection of an animal trapped. I stepped back, hitting the table behind me and spilling a lamp. By the time I looked again, it was gone. But I knew it hadn't run against time. Aviv, the fire in the fireplace, the orange light was my only consolation. I curled up on the floor, poker in hand, and waited for the night to pass, waited for daylight to come. Waited for the thing out there to decide to leave. I didn't sleep. Every time the wind howled through the trees, jumped, every creak of the wood made me hold my breath. Every shadow on the wall seemed like a body lurking. And so the hours finally, the first rays of dawn filtered through the window, my breath ragged. I slowly approached the door, took a big breath and opened it. The fresh morning air hit me in the face. The storm was gone. The forest was quiet, almost normal. But then I saw the marks on the door, on the window. Deep scratches, as if someone or something had been trying to tear the wood. I swallowed saliva. I didn't stay to analyze it. Any more packaging, and I ran to my car. I didn't look back. I didn't want to know if he was still looking at me. I drove for hours without stopping. When I finally got home, I threw the cabin key into the trash. I wouldn't go there ever. The next nights were restless. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw him, that smile, those eyes, that voice calling me little mouse. I thought that with him time, the feeling of being watched, would disappear, that everything would be behind me, that everything was over. But now, sometimes, in the darkness of my room, I hear a knock on my window, tap, 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 and a deep, mocking voice whispering to me, "From nowhere I'll find you, little mouse." The pungent smell of burnt rubber filled my nostrils as I slammed on the brakes, causing my old Chevy truck to stop with a shudder in that lonely stretch of back road. Thin threads of steam rose from the hood, mixing with the dust. My tires had kicked up as they descended into the sweltering summer heat. Realization hit me like a hammer. I was stranded in the middle of nowhere, with no cell phone signal, and with night fast approaching. I'm Jake, a 28-year-old construction worker returning home after a long day at the site. From work, taking a shortcut through the countryside had seemed to me a good idea at the time, saving him when he opened the hood. He received me the radiator seal and the unmistakable smell of burnt oil. Even with my basic knowledge of mechanics, I knew that this was not something I could fix. Right there I needed help, and I needed it quickly. The sun was sinking on the horizon, dyeing the sky with orange and purple tones to the distance. About 400 meters, I made out a dirt road that deviated from the main road, perhaps leading to a farm where I could ask for a phone or at least directions to the nearest town. If other option, I started walking. The cornfields rose on both sides like living walls, dry stems rustling in the breeze as darkness hung over the landscape. That murmur seemed to intensify, more insistent, closer. More than once I was surprised looking over my shoulder, unable to shake the feeling that someone or something was on me, and after what seemed like hours, but it was probably only about 20 minutes, I reached the fork. The dirt road led into a small forest of twisted, gnarled trees. An almost illegible wooden sign in the dim twilight. It said Farm, Migan, a mile. I felt a wave of relief. A farm meant people, a telephone, maybe even someone with mechanical knowledge. I quickened my pace, but when I reached the entrance of the forest a shiver ran down my spine. Something was not right. The air felt thicker, charged with an inexplicable energy and the silence I had not noticed before. But now it hit me hard. There were no crickets, no hooting owls, no rustling of branches under small nocturnal animals, just absolute silence, stifling, hesitant at the edge of the forest, every instinct inside me screaming at me to turn around. But the thought of spending the night trapped in my broken-down truck propelled me forward. The trail meandered through the trees. Barely visible in the gloom, I stumbled more than once with exposed roots, cursing quietly just as I was about to give up. The trees opened and I found myself in a clearing bathed in moonlight. In the center stood an old country house, its grayish wood worn by time. A slight movement in one of the upper windows caught my attention. I had seen a curtain move. My hope was reborn. Someone must be home. I climbed onto the porch, my footsteps echoing in the rotten wood. I raised my hand and tapped firmly on the front door. For a long moment there was no response. Then, just as I was about to knock again, I heard the shuffling of feet inside the house. The porch light flickered CND. Momentarily the door opened with a creak, revealing the silhouette of a hunched figure. Yes, a voice as old and worn out as the house itself. Between I closed my eyes against the light. "Sorry for disturbing the lady," I said with cautious. My truck broke down on the road and I was hoping to use her phone to call for help. The figure moved and I could see her more clearly. It was an old woman with a face furrowed with wrinkles and shaggy white hair. But it was her eyes that disturbed me, pale, almost colorless, as if they could see through me. "There is no phone," she whispered, "but you can stay tonight if you want. It's not safe being outside after dark." A shiver ran down my spine, but I forced myself to ignoring it. Was surely just a local superstition, and really what other choice did I have? "Thank you." "You murmur," forced to do so. The old lady stepped aside and motioned me to come in. The house smelled of dust and time. Every corner was crammed with old photographs, books, mosses and objects covered in dust. "The guest room is upstairs," said the woman, pointing to a narrow staircase. "First door on the left. Don't enter any from the other rooms." I nodded, suppressing a chill as I climbed the stairs. I felt his gaze fixed on my back. The guest room was small and simple, a rusty iron bed, a lame bedside table and an old lamp. The air smelled rancid, as if the room had been locked for years. I sat on the edge of the bed, trying to ignore the creeping uneasiness. Sleep was slow in coming through my chest. Every creak and moan from the old house kept me on my toes, and always, that feeling of being watched. It was close to 2 in the morning when I heard it, a soft scratch on the wall behind the headboard. At first I ignored it. It could be a mouse. But then the sound intensified, transforming into a long, methodical scratch. My breathing became erratic. Somewhat I was inside the wall. I stood up away from the headboard. The scratch stopped. For an instant the silence was absolute, and then, with a dry bang, a piece of the wall cracked. A pair of red eyes looked at me from the darkness. I ran downstairs, my feet hitting the rotten planks. The front door shook under my weight, and I threw myself outside, the night air burning my lungs behind me. Something was roaring from inside the house, something not human. I rushed down the road, not daring to look back. Then I saw the lights of a car. A police patrol stopped in secco in front of me. The officer came out immediately, with one hand on his pistol. "You're fine, sir." I turned to the house, but the Migan farm was no longer there. There was only an empty lot covered with grass. The officer insisted on taking me to the station. There he informed me that there was no farm in that area for over 40 years. I never took that shortcut again, because some roads lead to places that should never be found. The Latico key felt strangely heavy on my palm as I pulled up at the foot of the narrow staircase. My uncle's last words echoed in my mind. "Do what? Don't open the red door." But curiosity is a powerful force, and as I climbed the creaky wooden steps, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was about to discover a family secret that would change my life forever. My name is Jay. I'm a 25-year-old freelance writer, and I recently inherited the old Victorian house from my eccentric Uncle Edgar. I had always been fascinated by him, attracted by his aura mysterious and the fantastic stories he told. But in his later years he became a recluse. He refused visitors and communicated only through cryptic letters. The house was a veritable treasure trove of rarities, shelves full of dusty tomes on dark themes, display cases with artifacts from all over the world, and strange machines whose purpose I could not even imagine. But what intrigued me most was the attic. Throughout my childhood, that place was strictly forbidden. Every time I asked for him, my uncle dodged the conversation with an enigmatic smile. Now, as the sole heir to his legacy, he finally had a chance to discover what was there. The key clicked into the lock with a satisfying snap, and the door opened with a groan of protest. The attic was smaller than he had imagined, lit only by a circular window in the ceiling. Dust floated in the air, dancing in the dim light. There were trunks, old furniture, and piles of yellowed papers strewn everywhere. But what caught my attention the most was the door, a red door on the back wall. The color was vibrant, almost too intense for the gloom of the attic, my heart pounding as I approached. That was the door my uncle warned me not to open. Common sense told me that I should get away, that I should respect his last wishes, but the writer in me, the part that craved mysteries and hidden stories, pushed me to go forward. I reached out and touched the doorknob. It was frozen. A shiver ran down my spine. I hesitated for a moment, but with a deep breath I turned the handle and pushed the door. I don't know what I expected to find. Maybe a secret room full of forbidden books, a hidden treasure. What I found defied all logic. Beyond the red door there was not a room, but a vortex of colors and lights in constant motion, pulsating and turning inside that impossible whirlwind. Floating, a book seemed antique, bound in dark leather with strange symbols engraved on its cover. Without thinking I reached out and took it. The moment my fingers touched the surface of the book, the vortex collapsed with a thunderous roar. I found myself back in the attic, the red door slamming shut behind me with such force that the whole house seemed to press the book to my chest, my mind spinning with questions. What it was that I had just seen? What had this book in it? Why had my Uncle Edgar hidden it with trembling hands? I went downstairs and made my way to his study. I sat down at his old wooden desk, and I examined the book more closely. The leather was warm to the touch, almost as if it had a life of its own. The symbols on the cover seemed to move when I didn't look at them directly. I swallowed hard, and with a deep breath I opened it. The pages were filled with dense writing in a language I didn't recognize. There were diagrams, illustrations of creatures that could not exist, beings with too many eyes, too many arms, anatomies that defied the laws of nature. Suddenly, a loose leaf fell from the book. It was a letter. The calligraphy was unmistakable, that of my Uncle Edgar. "My dear Jay, if you are reading this, it means that I have departed from this world and that you have ignored my warning about the red door. I do not blame you. Curiosity is part of our nature. It has been our greatest strength and our greatest curse. The book you now hold is called the Codex Umbra. It has been in our family for generations, passing only to those with the gift of understanding its secrets, is a window to worlds beyond ours, a map of hidden realities, a record of beings and powers that humanity should not know. But it is also dangerous. The knowledge it contains has a price. The more you read it, the thinner it will become, the barrier between your world and others. You will see things that no one else can see, and she will see you. I spent my life studying the Codex, marveling with its revelations. But it also brought terrors that haunted me until my last breath. Now I leave you this burden, not out of cruelty, but because I believe you have the strength to bear it. Be careful, Jay. The path you have chosen will not be easy, but know that I am proud of you. With all my love, Uncle Edgar. I sat on the letter, trembling, and part of me wanted to close the book, seal it far away, and pretend that I had never found it. But another part, the same one that led me to open the red door in the first place, I was excited. This was more than a simple inheritance. It was an invitation to the unknown. The following weeks I spent immersed in the study of the Umbra Codex. I lost track of time. I barely slept. I barely ate. Little by little I began to deciphering their language, understanding their diagrams, and just as my uncle noticed, things began to change. At first they were subtle shadows that seemed to move when I wasn't looking, at whispers in the dark corners of the house. But the more I learned, the more tangible the impossible became. I began to see creatures reflected in mirrors, strange landscapes. In my dreams sometimes I woke up with sand on my bed, or with the scent of flowers that they didn't exist on Earth. Then on the night of the full moon, exactly a month after opening the red door, I understood everything. I had been reading a particularly complex passage from the Codex. I unconsciously began to murmur the words aloud. The air in the room became heavy. The shadows crawled along the walls, forming a dark whirlwind. And out of nowhere something emerged, a being with impossible limbs and an incandescent eye in the center of his face, watching me, waiting. The threshold was open, and now I had to decide whether to cross it or seal it forever. The frantic barking woke me up suddenly, my heart hammering in my chest as I sat up in bed. Molly, the docile golden retriever of the Johnsons, sounded like she was trying to wake the dead. Extensions. The heat ran down my back. It wasn't just the typical uproar of a dog asking to go out into the garden. Something was wrong. I'm Alex, a 22-year-old college student, and I'd been taking care of the Johnsons' house for a week while they were on vacation in the Caribbean. It was a simple job, watering the plants, picking up the mail, and keeping Molly company. The spacious suburban house. It was a welcome change from my tiny dorm room at the university, and up until that moment everything had been peace and quiet until tonight. The screen of my phone flashed 2:37 to Molly kept barking, each bark more desperate than the last. I got up and opened the door to the guest room. Molly called softly, "What's up, girl?" The bark immediately stopped. A low, menacing growl replaced it. The direction of the sound was coming from the kitchen near the back door. Every instinct inside me was telling me to go back to the room, lock the door, and call. But what if Molly was in danger, or worse, and if there was really someone inside the house? I took the heaviest object I could find, a glass vase from the hallway table, and I walked down the stairs with cautious steps. Every creak of the wood beneath my feet sounded too loud in the tense stillness of the house. When I reached the kitchen, a moonbeam illuminated the room through the window. Molly stood by the back door, completely stiff, with her fur standing on end and the eyes fixed on something I couldn't see. "Molly," you murmur. Eyes followed the direction of her gaze, and then I saw it, a shadow darker than darkness itself, moving behind Molly. He was humanoid, but wrong, tall, too thin. His proportions were subtly wrong, disturbingly unnatural. I opened my mouth to scream, but no sound came out. The shadow raised a hand, a grotesquely long-fingered hand, and directed it toward the handle of the back door. It was then that Molly exploded in barking. Breaking the trance I was entrapped, I ran to the light switch and pulled it with all my might. The sudden glare blinded me. For a second, when my eyes got used to it, the shadow had disappeared. The door was closed as I had left it before sleeping. Molly was still growling, but now her gaze was swinging between me and the window. I tried to convince me that it had been an illusion, a trick of light and lack of sleep, but Mole knew the truth for the rest of my stay. She refused to go near the back door at night. She slept glued to me, her ears alert to every sound, and sometimes in the depths of the morning she woke up with her low and menacing growl, her eyes riveted on some dark corner. When the Johnsons returned, I told them nothing how to explain something that I didn't even understand. I politely declined their offer to take care of the house again on future occasions. But before I left I took one last look upstairs, and there in the window of the Johnsons' room I saw something. For just a second, a tall, thin figure watching me step on the accelerator. I didn't slow down until the street was far behind me. It's been months since that night, but the feeling of being watched hasn't gone away. Sometimes in the gloom of my room I hear a slight scratch on the door, and when I muster up the courage to look through the peephole, I see nothing, just a darkness too dense, too still, too alive. The rusty gate creaked in protest when I pushed it, the sound echoing ominously. In the Enos abandoned from Ravenswood Asylum, moonlight filtered through the gnarled branches of unkempt trees, casting twisted shadows that seemed to move in the corner of my eye. I swallowed hard, trying to hold back the chill that ran down my spine. It was just a summer job. I reminded myself of 3 months as a security guard in an old and empty building. How bad could it be? My name is Mike. I'm 20 years, and I'm a college student. I desperately needed money for the next semester's tuition, and when I saw the ad to be a night watchman in Ravenswood, I didn't hesitate. Yes, the place had a creepy reputation full of rumors of abused patients, cruel doctors, and unsolved disappearances, but I didn't believe in ghosts. Plus the floor was incredibly good, too good. The security company gave me clear instructions: make rounds every hour, check that there are no intruders, no vandalism, and most importantly, don't enter the main building. According to them, the building was in ruins and dangerous, but as I shone my flashlight on the facade that first night, I had the feeling that the warning had nothing to do with the structure. The first 3 nights were quiet, too quiet. There were no noises of nocturnal animals or buzzing insects or the typical creak of an old building settling into its base, only silence until the 4th night. It was about 2:30 in the morning when I heard the sound, a soft song almost like a murmur floating in the stagnant air. I stopped in secco, trying to locate the fountain. The sound came from inside the forbidden building. My first reaction was to think that someone had sneaked in. I turned on my flashlight and went to the front door. To my surprise, one of the boards that they sealed the entrance, it was loose, swaying slightly in the breeze. I didn't remember it being like this before. "Hello," I called, my voice echoing in the darkness. The singing stopped. For an instant the silence returned, and then a whisper so low that as soon as I caught it, "Come inside. We've been waiting for you." Fear slipped through my veins like ice. Every cell in my body screamed at me to turn around and run away. But something. He pushed me to keep going with one last breath. I snuck through the gap and I entered Ravenswood. The interior was a world alien to the outside. The corridors were covered in dust and moo, with wallpaper peeling off in strips and furniture rotten by the humidity. There were still rusty stretchers, empty wheelchairs, and medicine bottles scattered on the floor. But the worst thing was the smell. A mixture of humidity, confinement, and something. "But there's someone here, that's something rotten," I asked, my voice just a whisper. No, there was no answer, only the echo of my own voice and the sound of footsteps upstairs. My flashlight flickered. "You murmur," but a shiver ran down my spine. For during the brief second when it was dark, I had seen something. A figure standing at the end of the hallway, tall, too thin, faceless. I didn't stay to find out more. I ran towards the exit, my breath turning to gasps and gasps. But when I got to the door, it was closed. The loose board was no longer loose. It was completely nailed, as if it had never been moved. My flashlight flashed again, and when it came back on, the walls were covered with hands. Dozens of footprints stamped on the plaster, as if dozens of people had tried to scratch their way out. A childish giggle echoed in the hallway behind. "You shouldn't be here of me," whispered a voice. I turned slowly, and there she was, a little girl of about 8 years old in a white nightgown covered in dirt. Her head was tilted, a smile that didn't quite fit her expression. "Go to before they see you," she said in a sing-song voice. Who I tried to ask. The answer came before I could finish the question. An inhuman roar from the top of the stairs. A silhouette dropped to the ground. It was tall, hunched over, with limbs too long and fingers ending in claws. It had no face, only a grayish skin and tense over an impossible skull. My legs reacted before my brain ran. I ran, with everything I had, desperately looking for a way out. The walls seemed to twist around me, the corridors lengthened, as if the building itself were changing to trap me inside. The murmurs intensified, turning into screams. A voice louder than the others resounded in my mind. "Stay." A flash of light cut me off suddenly. The noise disappeared, blinking, and I found myself standing outside the asylum. The sun was already rising, but the marks on my arms and legs were there, scratches, bruises, proof that it hadn't been a dream. I quit that same day, but even now, months later, Ravenswood hasn't let me go. Some nights, just before I go to sleep, I hear the whispers. Sometimes I wake up with the feeling that there is someone else in my room, and once, only once, I caught a reflection in the mirror, a face, or rather the absence of one. The key of the Latico weighed strangely on my palm. As I stood at the foot of the narrow staircase, my uncle's last words still echoed in my mind: no matter what, don't open the red door. But curiosity is a powerful force, and as I climbed the creaking steps, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was about to discover a family secret that would change my life forever. The attic was smaller than I imagined, lit only by the dim light that came in through a small circular window. Dust hung in the air, and a smell of stale with old paper and rotten wood permeated the atmosphere. My eyes swept the room, past old trunks, furniture covered with sheets and piles of yellowish books, but my attention was immediately fixed on her. The red door was at the back of the room, standing like an ominous shadow among the forgotten objects. It was dark wood, with a deep crimson tone, almost bright in the dim light. It had no lock, it had no knob, was just there waiting. For a shiver ran down my spine. My uncle's words echoed in my head: no matter what happens, don't open the red door. I approached. Cautiously, the heart beating hard in my chest, I raised my hand and ran my fingers over the surface of the wood. It was cold, more than it should be, and then it happened. The door vibrated as if something behind it had felt my eye touched. I stepped back sharply, my breathing speeding up. Everything in my body was screaming at me to get out of there. But then I heard the voice. Jay was a sweet whisper, tempting my name, pronounced with an impossible softness. I swallowed, my throat dry. Uncle Edgar, I asked in a low voice. Although I knew he was dead, there was no answer, only a dull but insistent thud from the other side of the door. Something was there waiting. I held my breath, while the red stain on the wood seemed to beat as if it had a pulse of its own. An irrational thought crossed my mind: and if you are not closed, and if I can open it? My fingers moved before I could stop them, pressing against the surface. A crack, a whisper, and then the door opened by itself. An abyss of darkness stretched out before me. There was no floor, there were no walls, only an unfathomable, deep and infinite void. The air inside moved as if something huge was breathing in the blackness. I took a step back, but something grabbed my arm, bony hands, cold as ice. I turned my head sharply, and found myself face to face with him, Uncle Edgar, or what was left of him. His skin was pale and withered, with deep cracks as if it were broken porcelain. His deep, dark eyes shone with an unnatural glow. His mouth opened in a smile too wide. He knew that you would come, Jay. His voice was the same as always, but at the same time it wasn't. I tried to let go, but his grip was like steel. Listen carefully. His eyes shone. He still has a choice, but if you cross this door there will be no turning back. The pressure of his hand intensified. Let me go, I whispered, feeling the abyss behind me, sucking. His smile widened, and then, with an impossible force, he pushed me towards the door. The world exploded in a swirl of shadows and wind, and I fell for what seemed like an eternity. The air was cold and dense, as if I descended through an unfathomable void. There was no light or sound, just the feeling of falling into an infinite space. Just when I thought I would never hit rock bottom, opened in a gust of icy wind, and land on the ground, trying to catch my breath. The ground beneath me, it was smooth and cold like polished stone. I sat up slowly, flickering in the gloom, and then I saw it. The hallway stretched out in both directions, with black stone walls covered with inscriptions that seemed to move if I looked at them too long. The light came from floating torches that burned with a bluish, flickering flame. The air smelled something old, like old books and moisture trapped for centuries. I got up with difficulty, my mind still trying to process what had happened. Where the hell I am? The hallway was in complete silence. There was no sign of Uncle Edgar or the door he had fallen through. I tried to breathe calmly, but my heart was pounding in my chest. I had to keep going. I started walking, with each step echoing on the stone beneath my feet. The hallway seemed endless, but after a while I saw something ahead, a figure. I was on my back, dressed in long and dark. I stopped at dry. Hello. My voice sounded muffled in the immensity of the hallway. The figure didn't move. I hesitated for a moment, and then I moved forward cautiously. When I was close enough, I felt a chill run over my coat. Long, the hunched posture was Uncle Edgar. Uncle, I whispered slowly, very slowly. He turned his head towards me, but his face was not my uncle's. His skin was stretched and withered with deep, dark cracks. Her eyes were empty and infinite black wells, and when she opened her mouth to speak, I escaped. My instinct screamed at me to run, and so I did. I ran without looking back, feeling the weight of her gaze piercing my back. The corridors twisted and changed around me. The Symbols on the walls pulsed with a sickly light. The shadows seemed to move when I didn't look directly, and then at the turn a corner I saw the door. It was another red door, but this one was open. Without thinking about it, I ran to it and threw myself through the threshold. A burst of light blinded me. The world spun and dissolved in a whirlwind of images and shadows, and then, without warning, I was back in the attic. I fell to the wooden floor, panting. The air was heavy with dust. The circular window let in a faint ray of the red door was there, but now it was closed. I crawled backwards away from it as if it were a sleeping animal that I didn't want to wake up. My skin was cold, sticky with sweat. I sat on the floor breathing heavily, trying to understand what the hell had happened. I didn't know how long I was there looking at the door, not daring to move, but then I noticed a detail that froze my blood. The door now I had a knob, and even worse, from the other side someone was turning it. I fell into darkness for what felt like an eternity. The air around me was thick and icy, and the feeling of infinite emptiness enveloped me. I couldn't scream. I couldn't breathe. I could only fall suddenly without warning. I hit something solid. The impact took my breath away. I gasped for the air itself. I breathed and I looked around and saw that I was in what seemed to be an endless corridor of black stone. The walls were covered with strange symbols engraved in a calligraphy that I didn't recognize but somehow felt familiar. I tried to convince myself that it was a dream, but it wasn't. I could feel the cold in my bones, the roughness of the stone under my fingers. This was real, and it wasn't just a murmur, reverberating through the low corridor, constant, came from everywhere and from none at once. I stood up with difficulty, my heart beating wildly. A movement to my left made me turn sharply. Something slipped through the shadows, not walking, not crawling, but gliding with a fluidity that made me feel nauseating. I could not see its full form, only fragments of a silhouette, too tall, too thin. The whisper grew in intensity. It was not a murmur. Anyone was my name. Jay. My muscles tensed. I had to move. I had to get out of there. I chose a random path and ran. The halls were labyrinthine, all the same, with the same unnatural glow in the torches, and the whisper followed me louder, closer. I turned a corner and stopped in dry. In front of me there was a door, but not just any door was the same. The red door. My mind he twisted with the impossibility of that. How could it be here? The wood had the same texture, the same deep red color, as if it were beating with a life of its own. And the worst thing was opening very slowly, 1 centimeter, another, and then I saw it, something on the other side, something waiting for me. I couldn't move, I couldn't breathe. Eyes peeked through the crack, infinite blackness, with an internal glow like embers in a bottomless cavern. And then a hand emerged, long, bony. It wasn't human. It was like that of a corpse that had been forgotten for centuries in the dark. The hand reached out to me, fingers moving as if they were calling me, and then the voice spoke. It wasn't a whisper. This time it was thundering. It rumbled in the halls, in my bones, in my own soul. It's time for you to claim your inheritance. An icy wind hit my face, pushing me towards the open door. I couldn't resist, I couldn't fight. The darkness was devouring, and then, just as I was about to be sucked into that threshold, a firm hand grabbed my arm. I turned sharply. It was my Uncle Edgar, but not like I'd seen him before, not with broken skin and sunken eyes. This time he looked like I remembered him from my childhood. No, yet, Jay. His voice was strong. Clara. Still he didn't push me back. The door slammed shut, and then I woke up. I was on the attic floor, panting, drenched in sweat. The red door was still there, but this time it was closed with an iron chain. I got up trembling. My Uncle Edgar was gone. But on the floor just in front of the door was an old yellow envelope with my name handwritten. I picked it up with fingers, trembling, and opened it. Inside there was a letter with just one sentence: when the time comes you'll know what to do from that day on. I never touched the red door again, but I know that someday it will open again, and when it does, I'll have to choose. The first time I saw the child in the mirror, I thought I was losing my sanity. I found behind my reflection, pale and solemn, with eyes full of plea. I blinked and disappeared. But that was just the I started a nightmare that would consume my life and defy everything I thought I knew about reality. My name is Emily, and until months ago I was an ordinary woman. 28 years old. I had a stable job as a graphic designer, a cozy apartment in the city, and a cat called Whiskers, more attitude than fur. Everything changed the day I bought that antique mirror in a flea market. It was a beautiful piece, an ornate golden frame tarnished by time, with the glass somewhat fogged up but still functional. The old woman who sold it to me practically pushed it into my hands. Her eyes clouded with intensity as she told me it was meant for me. I must have suspected it then, but I was too enchanted by the mirror's vintage aesthetic to listen to my instinct the first week after hanging it in my room. It was all normal until that night when I saw the boy at first I tried to convince myself that it was just a trick of light. Maybe my imagination was playing tricks on me after working late on a project, but deep down I knew it was something else. The boy appeared again a few nights later. This time I saw him longer. He was a boy of about 10 years old with dark and tousled hair and eyes that looked too old to his age. Never spoke. He just looked at me with that pleading expression that made my chest hurt. I started to avoid the mirror. I covered it with a sheet when I slept, but it didn't matter. I started to see it in the reflections, away from the windows, on my computer screen, in the puddles of water in the street after the rain. Always watching me, always in silence. My work began to suffer. I couldn't concentrate. I jumped at every shadow, at every unexpected reflection. My friends noticed the change in me, the deep, dark circles under my eyes, the constant nervousness, the way I avoided mirrors. They suggested that I go to a doctor who maybe was stressed. How could I explain to them that I was being stalked by a ghost child? Everything came to a head a month after buying the mirror. That night I woke up with the feeling that someone was watching me, and there he was, not in the mirror, not in a reflection standing at the foot of my bed. This time it was real. I sat up suddenly with my heart hammering in my chest. "Who are you?" I asked in a trembling voice. "What do you want?" The boy opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Then urgently he pointed to the mirror. Then he pointed to me. "I don't understand," I whispered. "What am I supposed to do?" He pointed to the mirror again, and then gestured as if he was stepping forward. I got out of bed, feeling the air in the room grow colder with every step I took. The mirror was still covered by the sheet, but even before I touched it I knew something was wrong. With a lump in my throat, I slowly lifted the fabric. My reflection didn't imitate me. I wasn't smiling, and I wasn't smiling. That wasn't my reflection. Before I could react, hands emerged from the mirror and grabbed me with inhuman strength. I screamed, struggling against the impossible grip. I felt a tug on my body as if I were being dragged towards the glass reality itself, splitting into fragments of light and shadow. I fell, and when I opened my eyes, I was on the cold floor of a room that seemed to be a twisted version of mine. The colors were dull, everything was inverted, like I was seeing the world through a reflection, and there standing above me with a triumphant smile was my reflection, or whatever it was that had been pretending to be me. At last said, in a voice that was mine, but distorted, hollow, "You have any idea how long I've waited for someone to fall into the trap? This place, it's been so boring." I sat up suddenly, backing up. "What are you? Where am I?" "My reflection. The thing I pretended to be." I laughed. "Oh, sweet human. This is the world behind the mirrors. This is where all forgotten reflections and discarded dreams end." And I leaned into me with a wicked smile. "I'm you, or at least the version of you that could have been." I felt panic. It invaded, but the child, who is he? The creature's smile twisted, a hindrance, a remnant of the last soul trapped here. He's been trying to warn others for years, but it doesn't matter, it'll disappear soon now that I'm free. Reality hit me like a fist. I was trapped in this world of reflections and shadows, and that thing was out there living my life. "You can't do this," I whispered. "I don't belong here." "Oh, but you belong," he mocked. "My double. Everyone ends up here sooner or later. The world of mirrors always claims what belongs to it." Turned and crossed a gleaming threshold, leaving my reflection trapped in this distorted place. I sat there trying to take it in. How I could get out of here? How could I get my life back? Time passed strangely in this world. I didn't know if it had been hours or days when Tommy the boy appeared again. He looked at me sadly and came closer. "There's a way out," he whispered. My heart raced. How he doubted. "It's dangerous, and even if it works, nothing will be the same. Tell me," I begged. "Tommy told me about an ancient mirror hidden in the depths of this realm. According to if a person found this mirror and pronounced his true name, not only his birth name, but the one that defined his essence, he could break the barrier between the worlds." It was a long way, but it was the only chance I had with Tommy as a guide. We set out on the quest. I told myself it was just a trick of light, my imagination playing tricks on me after staying up late working on a project. But deep down I knew it was something else. The boy appeared again a few nights later. This time for longer. I could make out more details. He seemed to be about 10 years old, with dark and tousled hair and eyes that seemed too old for his childish face. He did not speak. He just looked at me with that expression of plea that made a knot in my stomach. I began to avoid the mirror by covering it with a sheet at night, but it did not matter. I began to see the boy in other reflections, in the windows, on the screen of my computer, always watching me in silence. My work began to suffer. I couldn't concentrate. I jumped at any shadow or reflection. My friends noticed the change in me, the deep dark circles, the constant startles suggested that I visit a doctor. How could I explain to them that I was being stalked by a child in the mirror? Things got out of control. A month after buying the mirror, I woke up in the middle of the night and saw it, not in the mirror. Not in a reflection. I was at the foot of my bed this time. It was solid, real, or at least as real as a ghost can be. I pushed myself against the headboard, my heart beating with a painful force. "What do you want?" I managed to ask with a broken voice. The boy didn't answer. He just looked at me in despair and then pointed to the mirror. I turned my head slowly towards him. Something was wrong. My reflection wasn't mine. It was moving a second later than me, and then he smiled. I wasn't smiling. A chill ran through my body. "I don't understand," I murmur, looking at the child again. He pointed to the mirror again and then made a gesture as if he was taking a step forward. I looked at my reflection again. I was still smiling. Then suddenly some hands came out of the mirror, grabbed my wrists and pulled me with an impossible force. I screamed, struggling to free myself, but the pressure was unbearable. I felt my body being dragged into the glass as if I were being sucked in. The world exploded in flashes of light and shadow. When I regained consciousness, I found myself on the cold floor of a room that looked like mine, but it wasn't. Everything was upside down. The colors were strange, dull, and distorted. The room was reflected like a mirror. But something else was wrong. Then I saw it. My reflection was there, but it wasn't me. He was looking at me from the other side of the mirror with a smile of triumph. Finally his voice said, "A distorted replica of mine. You know how long I've waited for someone to fall into the trap." My throat dried up. "Who you are? What is this place?" My reflection. I laugh with cruel amusement. "Oh darling, it's you, or rather the version of you that could have been. And this is the world behind of the mirrors, where the shadows of what was and what might have been end up forgotten." My mind struggled to comprehend it, but the child, for the first time, the smile of my reflection vanished. A hindrance spat out. "The last poor soul trapped here has tried to warn others, but they never listened to it until it's too late. Horror took hold of me. Then I'm trapped here." My reflection threw me. "Of course you do. But don't worry. You'll get used to it, and who knows, maybe in a few decades you'll be the one to trick someone into taking your place." Turned around and walked through what looked like a door made of liquid light, leaving me alone in the grotesque, inverted version of my home. I don't know how long I was there. Time didn't seem to work the same way in this place. Eventually I found others trapped souls. Some had been there so long that they had forgotten the real world. Others were still desperately looking for a way out. It was Tommy, the boy in the mirror, who gave me hope. "There's a way," he whispered one night when he found me sitting in front of a distorted, mirrored version of my apartment. "But it's dangerous." As I asked in desperation, Tommy told me about an ancient mirror hidden in the depths of this realm. It was said that if anyone I found this mirror and said its real name, the name of its essence, it could break the barrier between the worlds. It was a risk, but it was my only option. With Tommy as my guide, I began the search. We faced impossible landscapes, creatures that lurked in the darkness, and worst of all, hopelessness. But we kept going until after what seemed like centuries we found the mirror. Its surface did not reflect anything. It was a whirlwind of light and shadows vibrating with an indescribable energy. "Remember," Tommy said, holding my hand, "it's not the name you were given. It's who you really are." I closed my eyes. I plunged deep inside, looking for beyond fear, beyond despair. And then I knew. I opened my eyes, looked at the mirror, and spoke a name I'd never heard before, but I recognized as mine. The world exploded in a whirlwind of light. When I woke up, I was on the floor of my room. The mirror was shattered. I had returned, but something had changed. My hair had turned completely white. Then I discovered that 3 months had passed. My friends and family were shocked by my disappearance. The creature that took my place had wreaked havoc in my life, but now it had disappeared without a trace. It has been a year since I escaped the mirror realm. I try to move on, convince myself that it was all a nightmare, but I know the truth, and sometimes in the reflections I see a flash of movement. Sometimes I think I see Tommy still trying to warn others, and sometimes I feel something else, something dark, waiting, because now I know that what we see in the mirror isn't always just a reflection. Sometimes it's something you want to be. The moment I heard the first I screamed. I knew this wouldn't be a normal on-call night working as a security guard. On the night shift at Oakwood Hospital, it was usually boring, but that night something in the air made me shudder, and I had no idea I was about to face a horror that would haunt me for the rest of my life. The scream echoed through the empty hospital corridors, bouncing off the walls in a way that it was impossible to determine where it was coming from. I jumped out of my chair with my heart beating in my throat. This wasn't the kind of sound I used to hear on my night shift. It wasn't a cry of pain or anguish common in a hospital. It was a scream of pure terror. I immediately grabbed my radio and called the nurse's station. Someone else heard that, where it came from. A few seconds of static were followed by the confused voice of one of the nurses. "Here, that everything here is calm." I frowned. "The Lord." There was a loud scream. "Don't tell me you didn't hear it, David. We haven't heard anything." He replied, his tone with a mixture of impatience and concern. "You're sure it was real?" Before I could answer, the scream sounded lower again, this time as if it came from somewhere farther away, and this time I felt it. A shiver ran down my spine. It wasn't just a sound. It was something that vibrated in the air, as if the entire hospital was containing them within its walls. "I'm going to investigate," I said over the radio, and I walked in the direction of the sound. My footsteps took me to the old wing of the hospital. This part of the building had been closed for renovations for months. No one had any reason to be there, however. The doors to the hallway were wide open. I stopped at the entrance. The air was colder. Here my breath came out in a small white cloud. This was not normal. I took out my flashlight and turned it on. "Hello," I knocked with my voice echoing in the empty hallway. "Nothing." I slowly went in. The wing was in complete abandonment. Old walls, stretchers covered with dusty sheets, the floor covered with a thin veil of dirt. Then I saw her at the end of the hall, a woman with her back to me, dressed in a threadbare and dirty hospital gown. Her dark hair was matted down her back. "Ma'am," I said cautiously, "she can't be here. She needs help." The woman didn't move. The air became denser. I took one more step. "Ma'am." Slowly, very slowly. The woman turned her head towards me, and I felt my blood run cold. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, but the worst thing was her eyes. There were no pupils, there were no irises, just a black void like two bottomless pits. I took a step back, panic rising up my throat. Then, with an unnatural crunch, the woman turned completely towards me. "Help me," she whispered. Her voice didn't come out of her mouth, but from everywhere, a sound that filled the air, that resounded in my bones. I blurted out, taking a step back, but before I could run she disappeared. She didn't walk, she didn't hide, she just vanished. I froze, the flashlight trembling in my hand. This couldn't be happening. "David, where are you?" The nurse's voice on the radio made me jump. I took it to my mouth with trembling hands. "I'm in the old. There's something here. I just saw someone." I swallowed hard. There was a silence. Then the answer, "David, you have to get out of there. Something's going on. The patients, everyone's seeing things. Shadows, voices. There's a total panic in the hospital." My skin stood on end. At that moment the lights in the hallway started to flicker, and out of nowhere a raspy laugh seeped into the air. There was no one there, but something was with me. I ran. I didn't look back. I didn't stop until I was back in the main section of the hospital. But even then I knew I wasn't safe. Panic had taken over the whole place. Patients screaming, nurses running back and forth, whispers coming from empty rooms, and worst of all, every time I looked at a window, a reflective surface, a monitor off, I saw those black eyes watching me. The night became hell, but when dawn came it all ended. The screams went out, the whispers disappeared, the screams disappeared. The official explanation was mass hysteria. They said that maybe there was a gas leak, a slight poisoning, something that made us imagine what we saw. But I know the truth. I saw it, I felt it, and although I quit my job shortly after, I still feel it, some nights awake from a start, convinced that someone is watching me from the darkness of my room. And sometimes, I only sometimes, hear his voice help me. The scream echoed through the empty corridors of the hospital, bouncing off the walls in a way that made it difficult to identify its origin. I stood up immediately, adrenaline shooting in my veins. That was not a cry of normal pain or anguish. It was pure absolute terror. I reached for my radio as I made my way quickly down the corridor. Someone else heard that where it came from. There was an instant of static before the nurse on duty answered, her confused voice. Here everything is quiet." I stopped in my tracks. How was it possible? Before I could process it, the scream, it was repeated more quietly, this time as if I was being choked by something. The skin on my arms stood on end. This time it came from the old wing of the hospital. That area had been closed for months due to renovations, and there was no one there. I gritted my teeth all the way through. My life had been skeptical of ghost stories. I preferred to focus on the real, on tangible threats, but at that moment, with the echo of that scream still vibrating in my ears, something inside me told me not to go. But I did. I turned on my flashlight and pushed the door of the old wing open, which opened with a chilling creak. The air inside was frozen, much colder than I thought. I should be in a heated hospital. The hallway was cast in shadows, with only a few flickering lights projecting eerie flashes on the chipped walls. I stepped forward, and the door closed behind me with a sharp bang. I turned immediately and tried the locked handle. I swallowed. Great you murmur, forcing me to keep moving forward. As I walked down the hallway, the sound of my own breathing seemed amplified in the oppressive stillness of the then. I saw her, a figure, with her back to the end of the hall. She was a woman in a tattered hospital gown, and her long dark hair falling matted down her back. She was staggering slightly, as if she couldn't stand. Well, ma'am, I said, moving forward cautiously. She shouldn't be here. She's fine. There was no response. She stood motionless. And then, with a naturally slow Anton, she turned towards me. I froze. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, with black veins snaking beneath the surface. But the worst thing was her eyes, completely black, empty. The woman raised a trembling hand and muttered in a harsh voice, "Help me," and then disappeared. Didn't walk, didn't run, just vanished into thin air. Instinctively backed away, icy sweat sticking to my back. That wasn't possible. It couldn't have disappeared like this. A crackling sound broke the silence. My radio. I took it with my hands. David. The nurse's voice sounded distorted, full of interference. "Get out of there." I got a knot in my stomach. "What's going on?" "Patients." The static intensified. "They're seeing things, shadows, voices in empty rooms. Something's wrong." And then all the lights in the hallway flicker violently before going out completely. An icy whisper filled the air. I wasn't alone. The hallway was plunged into absolute darkness. The air became dense, as if something invisible was pressing my flashlight to my chest once, and then it went out. An unnatural cold ran through my body, and then I heard it whispering. Not a single voice, but dozens, perhaps hundreds, murmuring in a low, unintelligible tone, came from everywhere in the empty rooms of the ceiling, from within the walls. My instinct screamed to run, to get out of there at once. My legs were not moving. It was then, when I noticed the figure was right in front of me, less than a meter away. I had not heard her approaching. It was the same woman I had seen before, but now her face was distorted in a grimace of suffering. Her lips moved, forming soundless words, and then, in a spasmodic movement, she raised her head and looked me straight in the eyes. My lungs ran out. His mouth slowly opened, and he let out a heart-wrenching scream that wasn't coming from his throat, but from everywhere. The doors along the hallway started banging violently, as if something inside every room was desperate to get out, and at that moment my body reacted. I finally turned around and ran. Ran like never before in my life, without worrying about where I was going, only with the need visceral of escaping from that thing. The shadows on the walls twisted and spread as if trying to catch me. The hallway seemed longer than it should be, as if the hospital itself was playing with me. But then I saw the exit, the door I had entered without stopping. I threw myself at it with all my might. This time the handle gawk. I fell to the other side, panting and trembling. When I looked back, the hallway was empty. The door to the old wing slowly closed with a creak, and suddenly everything was quiet again. I stood there trying to catch my breath when my radio creaked again. "David, where are you?" was the nurse's voice, now Clara, and without interference. It took her several seconds to respond when I told her I was at the entrance of the old wing. "It can't be." Her voice sounded restless. "We've been looking for Frowning. I'm fine. I think it's only been a few minutes." "No, David, it's been 3 hours." My blood froze. I had no explanation. They took me to the break room, where I saw that I wasn't the only one affected. Several patients were in shock. Some were muttering about having seen figures in the dark. Others were talking about shadow beings who had touched them with icy hands. But what else I was disturbed was an old man in a wheelchair, who looked me straight in the eye and said in a trembling voice, "The sick woman in room 403 was looking for my stomach." Turned that room had been closed for more than 50 years. The official version was that there was a gas leak in the old wing which caused hallucinations in some patients and staff, but I know the truth since that night. The hospital never felt the same again, and although I quit soon, there are still nights when I wake up suddenly with the feeling that something is watching me in the dark. Sometimes I swear that I still hear the whispers, and every time I pass in front of a hospital I feel a chill run down my spine because now I know the truth. Not all patients leave. When they die, some are still there waiting for the ace. For my flashlight flickered ominously as I slipped through narrow opening, the smell of damp earth and stale air filling my nostrils. Behind me I could hear Jake and Chris arguing in a low voice about which way to take. We were already lost. Although none of us wanted to admit it, when the reality of our situation became apparent, a chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the cold of the underground air. We were trapped in the depths of the caverns before, and the shadows seemed to close in around us. I'm Alex, a 23-year-old geology student with a passion for caving. When my friend suggested exploring the infamous Whispering Caverns as our last adventure before graduating, I accepted without hesitation. The cave system was known for its impressive formations and challenging passages, but it also had a certain reputation. Local legends told of strange noises, unexplained disappearances, and an otherworldly presence lurking in its deepest chambers. People now, while we were standing at a fork in the road of 3 identical tunnels, those legends didn't seem so funny anymore. I'm telling you, we came down that one, Jake insisted, pointing to the passage on the left. Chris shook his head. No way, man. We just passed through there. It has to be the one on the right. I remained silent, studying our surroundings. Something didn't feel right, but I couldn't pinpoint what the rock formations were. They were familiar and at the same time subtly wrong, as if they were a painting in which the artist had deliberately altered small details. Boys, I said, my voice echoing strangely in the confined space, I think we should step back, try to find a point of reference that we both recognize. They turned to me, and I saw my own fear reflected in their eyes. We had been down here for hours, much longer than we had planned. Our water reserves were running low, and the batteries in our lanterns wouldn't last forever. Just as we were about to retrace our steps, a sound echoed through the cavern. At first it was barely audible about the dripping water and our own breathing, but it soon grew louder until it became what sounded like whispers. Listen to that, Kais, his voice tense. We stood completely still, straining to hear. The whispers seemed to come from everywhere, a chaos of indistinct voices that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. It's just the wind, Jake said, but his voice lacked conviction. We all knew there wasn't wind so deep underground. As if they were responding to his words, the whispers intensified. Now I could almost make out words, although in a language I didn't know. The sound seemed to pull us into the central tunnel. We should take a look, I heard myself to say, though every instinct was screaming at me to run in the opposite direction. Maybe it's other cavers or a rescue team. Jake and Chris nodded their pale faces to the dim light of our flashlights. Slowly we walked into the tunnel, whispers growing with each step. The passage opened into a great chamber, its ceiling lost in the darkness. As our lights swept the room, I gasped. The walls were covered in strange symbols that glowed faintly with a phosphorescent light pulsed to the rhythm of the whispers that had reached a point of frenzy. What the hell is this place? Chris whispered, his voice barely audible over the noise. Before anyone could answer, the ground beneath our feet began to shake. Small stones fell from the ceiling, and I heard Jake scream, alarmed. We have to get out of here, I screamed, turning towards the entrance. But where the tunnel used to be now, there was only solid rock. Panic took hold of me. When I realized we were trapped, vibrations increased and cracks began to form on the floor. From them I could see a strange pulsating light. It was then, when I noticed that the symbols on the walls were moving, rearranging into new patterns. As I watched them, fascinated and horrified, they began to form English words. The door opens, the sleeper wakes up. A deafening roar filled the camera, drowning out even the whispers. The ground fell beneath us, and we fell in a whirlwind of light and sound. I don't know how long we fell. It could have been seconds or centuries. When they recover, I found myself lying on a cold stone floor in almost total darkness. My flashlight had disappeared, but a faint pulsating glow allowed me to see enough. As my eyes adjusted, I realized with horror that we were no longer in the caverns, as far as I could recognize. The chamber we were in was enough, with walls made of a black, glassy substance that seemed to absorb the little light available near me. I could make out the silhouettes of Jake and Chris, both unconscious but breathing. When I crawled towards them, a movement out of the corner of my eye made me freeze. Something emerged from the shadows. It was high at the end of the day, less than twice the height of a man, with a body that seemed to flow and change like smoke where he should have had a face. There was only a group of luminous points that with a start I understood were eyes. A fear like I had never felt before, paralyzed me when the creature approached. It stopped a few meters from us, watching us with those alien eyes. Then to my amazement he spoke. "Welcome, children of the surface," he said, his voice echoing in my mind instead of my ears. "We've waited a long time for his arrival." I found my voice, though it came out barely, like a whisper. "What are you? Where are we?" The form of being vibrated, as if it were funny. "We are the guardians of the deep, the guardians of the ancient ways, and you are in the heart of the world, where the barriers between realities weaken." As I spoke, more of your species emerged of the shadows surrounding us. Jake and Chris began to move, moaning as they regained consciousness. "Why they brought us here?" I asked, trying to keep the trembling out of my voice. "They came of their own volition," he replied, being his curiosity, his desire to explore the unknown. "He called us. We just facilitated his journey." Jake was already wide awake, now his eyes wide open in terror at the sight of our surroundings. "Alex, what is he?" "Passing where we are." Before I could respond to Jake, the being spoke again. "They are at a crossroads, children of the surface. The world above is changing. Sickened by the poison of its people, we offer a choice." Its voice resounded in my mind, like the echo of an unfathomable truth. "They can stay with us, learn the secrets of the deep, help maintain balance, or they can return to their world. But if they choose come back, will be our emissaries. They will carry our message. They will share what they have seen." I looked at Jake and Kai, seeing my own reflected in their faces. The offer was tempting, to learn the secrets of these beings, to discover truths that no human had imagined, but the thought of never seeing the light of the sun again, of leaving our families behind, our lives, I swallowed hard and spoke with a confidence that surprised me. "We need to go back. No, we can abandon our lives like this." The being was silent for a long moment, his eyes flickering with an inscrutable gleam. Finally he nodded. "So it will be. But remember this, once you have seen beyond the veil, you will never be able to return completely. Knowledge will always accompany you, calling you back to the depths." Before we could answer, the camera began to rotate around us. I felt that we were moving at an impossible speed, as if we were cutting through layers and layers of rock and dirt in a matter of seconds, and then suddenly we were back in the familiar tunnels of whispering caverns, blinded by the glare of flashlights and human voices. Rescuers found us wandering, disoriented, on the verge of collapse, told us that we had been missing for more than 24 hours. The official story was that we had missed out. That fear and dehydration had caused us to hallucinations of our own stories about glowing symbols and smoke creatures were dismissed as delusions caused by extreme stress. But I know the truth. Sometimes in the middle of the night, when all is quiet, I can still hear the whispers, and in my dreams I see those bright eyes calling me back to the heart of the world. We came out of the whispering caverns that day, but a part of me will always remain in those otherworldly depths, wondering what it would have happened if we had chosen to stay. The first time I saw the boy in the mirror, I thought he was losing his mind. I separated behind my reflection, pale and solemn, with pleading eyes for something I couldn't understand. Blink and disappeared. But that was just the beginning of a nightmare that would consume my life and challenge everything I thought I knew about reality. My name is Emily, and until 3 months ago it was only a 28-year-old woman with a completely normal life, had a steady job as a graphic designer, a cozy apartment in the city, and a cat named Whiskers who had more attitude than fur. Everything changed the day I bought that antique mirror at a flea market. It was a beautiful piece, an ornate gold frame, worn by time, and a slightly cloudy but still functional glass. The old lady who sold it to me, practically, she put it in my hands, her age-misted eyes shining with a strange intensity when she told me it was meant for me. I should have known then that something was wrong, but I was too delighted with the vintage air of the mirror to listen to my instinct. The first week after hanging it in my room, everything was fine, normal, but then came that night when I saw the child. I was convinced about what it was, just a trick of the light, my imagination playing with me after staying up late working on a project, but deep down I knew it was more than that. It appeared again a few days later, this time for longer. I could make out more details. She seemed to be about 10 years old, with dark and disheveled hair and eyes that looked too old for her young face. She never spoke, she just looked at me with that pleading look that broke my soul. I began to avoid the mirror by covering it with a sheet when I slept, but it didn't matter. I began to see it in the corner of my mirrored eye in Windows, on my computer screen. Always looking, always in silence, my work began to suffer. I couldn't concentrate. I jumped at every shadow, every reflection. My friends noticed the change in me, the deep dark circles, The way I shuddered every time I saw my own reflection. They thought I was sick. They suggested I see a doctor. How could I explain to them that I was being stalked by a child in a mirror? Things came to a head a month after I bought it. I woke up in the middle of the night and saw him standing at the foot of my bed, not in a reflection this time, solid, real, or at least as real as a ghost can be. I threw myself towards behind me, pressing against the headboard of the bed, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would come out of my chest. "Who are you?" I managed to murmur. "What do you want?" The boy's lips moved, but no sound came out of them. He raised a trembling hand and pointed to the mirror, then pointed at me, his eyes widening in desperation. Somehow I mustered up the courage to get out of bed and approach the mirror standing in front of him. With the child next to me, I noticed something strange. My reflection wasn't quite right. It was moving a split second after me. His eyes focused on something right behind my shoulder. I didn't understand. I whispered, looking at the child, "What am I supposed to do?" He pointed to the mirror again and then gestured as if he was taking a step forward. I looked again at my reflection that was now smiling at me. One way I definitely didn't. A shiver ran down my spine when I understood the truth. That wasn't my reflection. Before I could react, hands came out of the mirror, grabbing my arms and pulling me forward. I screamed, fighting against that impossible force, but it was too strong. I felt myself drawn into the mirror as the world around me broke into fragments of light and shadow. When I regained consciousness, I was lying on a cold stone floor in a room that looked like a twisted version of my bedroom. Everything was upside down, the colors were strange and dull, and there, standing above me with a triumphant smile, was my reflection, or rather the thing that had been pretending to be my reflection. Finally said her voice, a distorted echo of mine, "You have any idea how long I've been waiting for someone to fall into the trap? This realm has been so boring." I jumped to my feet backwards. "What are you? Where am I?" I laughed, a sound that made me shudder. "Oh, sweet human, this is the world behind the mirrors, where all forgotten reflections end and discarded dreams." My hands trembled. "And you are you?" whispered, "or rather the version of you that could have been if you had made different decisions." My mind gave tossing and turning, trying to process his words. But the child, who was he, the creature, lost his smile for a moment. "A hindrance, a remnant of the last soul trapped here, has been trying to warn people for years, the little brat. But it doesn't matter anymore. He'll fade away now that I'm free." Horror came over me when I understood the magnitude of what had happened. I was trapped in some nightmarish realm while that thing was going on. "Free in my world? You can't do this," I said, trying to stay calm. "I don't belong here." "Oh, but yes," I purr. "Everyone ends up here sooner or later. The mirror realm always claims what belongs to it." He looked at me with amusement and added, "Don't worry, you'll get used to it. Who knows? Maybe in a few decades you'll be the one to trick some poor naive person to take your place." With those words, he turned and went through that seemed to be a glowing door, leaving me alone in that twisted mockery of my room. I don't know what happened there. Trying to comprehend my new reality, hours, maybe days, time seemed to move differently in that place. Finally I forced myself to explore my prison, the mirror realm as I came to call it. It was a maze of distorted reflections of the real world. I could see glimpses of familiar places, my apartment, my office, the coffee shop where I used to. But everything was wrong. The colors were dull or too vibrant. The sounds were repeated strangely, and the shadows moved when I wasn't looking. And I wasn't the only one. There, as I wandered, I found other lost souls, people who, like me, had been deceived or accidentally stumbled upon this world. Some had been trapped so long that they no longer remembered their lives. Others were still desperately looking for a way out. The boy I knew then, his name was Tommy. He had been trapped in the 50s. Since then I had tried to warn others, but hardly anyone understood his signs until it was too late. I was also trapped, but I refused to give up. I had to find a way to get my life back. I had to get my life back. The wind howled like a wounded animal as I gripped the steering wheel, squinting to try to see through the snow-covered windshield. That mountain pass was treacherous enough on the best days, but in the middle of the worst storm in decades, driving around was nothing short of suicide. My old Subaru skidded dangerously around a sharp bend, and I cursed my own stubbornness. I should have heeded the warnings and stayed in town. But now, with night falling and the storm getting worse, I knew I had to find shelter soon or I'd become another frozen corpse on the local news. My name is Alex. I'm a freelance photographer, and I'd come to the Rocky Mountains in search of the perfect shot of winter. I always prided myself on Dad to handle extreme conditions of going where others didn't dare to capture stunning images, but feeling my tires lose traction once again, I knew that maybe this time I had taken my luck too far, just as I was considering stopping and waiting for the storm. Inside my car, a flash of light appeared in the distance, barely visible in the swirling snow. It seemed to come from a cabin. Hope ran through me as I steered the car toward the light, praying that it wasn't a hallucination caused by exhaustion. As I got closer, the silhouette of the building became clearer. It was bigger than I had thought at first, more of a lodge than a simple cabin, but something about it made me uneasy. The architecture was strange, with angles that seemed to be slightly crooked, in a way that was hard to describe. The windows were asymmetrical and elongated, and despite the light I had seen, there was no sign of cars outside or recent activity. Bears can't be choosers, I thought. I had no choice. The wind almost ripped my car door from my hands as I came out, the snow hitting my face with an intensity that made me gasp. I rushed to the entrance of the lodge, my backpack hitting my back with each step, and I hit the heavy wooden door. There was no response. I tried the handle, and to my surprise, it was open. Hello, I knocked, taking a step inside. Someone here? The first thing I noticed was the silence, despite the wind roaring outside. The moment I closed the door, the sound disappeared completely. Absolute silence. The lobby was immense, with vaulted ceilings that seemed to extend further than the exterior structure suggested. Antique furniture was scattered throughout the space in small islands of comfort. The walls were covered with strange paintings whose landscapes and figures seemed to move. When I didn't look directly, something was wrong. But the warmth of the lodge contrasted too much with the deadly cold outside, so I forced myself to ignore my discomfort. Hello. I went back to calling. A creak on the spiral staircase across the room spun me around in dry. A thin, hunched old man was slowly descending. His hair was white as snow, and his blue eyes pierced me with an intensity that gave me goosebumps. When he spoke, his voice was loud despite his frail appearance. "Welcome, traveler," he said. "We've been waiting for you." A shiver ran down my spine. I repeated, looking around the empty lobby. The old man smiled, but the gesture didn't reach his eyes. "Oh yes, here at the Twilight Lodge we always have guests. You just can't see them yet." Every fiber of my being was screaming at me to turn around and run away. But outside I was in for a deadly storm, and here at least it was hot. I swallowed hard and forced a nervous smile. "I'm sorry for the intrusion," I said. "Just I need a place where to stay until the storm passes. I can pay." The old man waved his hand. "Money is worthless here," he replied, "but we can make another kind of arrangement. Tell me what you're looking for." The question puzzled me. "I'm a photographer," I replied. "I seek to capture the beauty of the mountains in winter." The old man bowed his head, his eyes shining with an emotion I couldn't identify. "Ah, an artist," muttered. "Someone looking to capture the yes. Yes, I think it will fit." Well, here before I could ask what he meant by that, he turned and started to climb the stairs. "Come on," he said without turning. "I will show you your room." I hesitated just for a moment before following him as we climbed. I noticed that the staircase felt longer than it should have been. It has been much more LGA. When we finally reached the hallway on the second floor, something on my mind, he told me that he couldn't have so many doors. Each one was different. Some were made of antique wood, others of rusty metal. One seemed to be made of stone, another of glass that reflected indistinct shapes. The old man stopped in front of a deep blue door and pushed it open. "This will be your room during your stay," he announced. I took a step inside and was breathless. The opposite wall was made entirely of glass, revealing a breathtaking landscape of snow-capped peaks illuminated by the moon. But that wasn't possible. The storm kept raging outside, and the lodge wasn't high enough to have a view like that. My mind refused to accept what I saw. "What is this place?" I whispered. The old man looked at me with that cryptic smile. "The Twilight Lodge exists in the spaces between realities," he said. "Here, the world is flexible." My pulse quickened. "And the price? You said there was a price." Old man tilted the head. "The longer you stay, the more you'll pay," he said that. He turned and closed the door behind him, leaving me alone. My first reaction was to try to open it again, but the door didn't move. I took a deep breath and went to the window. The scenery was hypnotic. I took out my camera and began to take photos, images that defied logic, mountains that changed shape when I wasn't looking, at strange lights in the sky and always in the sky, edges of each photo, shadows that shouldn't be there. I don't know how much time I spent taking photos, but when I finally put the camera down and looked in the mirror in the room, my reflection was faded, pale, as if I was becoming part of the lodge. Panic overtook me. I grabbed my equipment and ran to the door. But when I opened the hallway, it wasn't the same. The doors stretched out in all directions. Without end, I ran. I heard whisper following me when I finally found my way out and threw myself into the cold of the mountain. I woke up in my car on the side of the road. The storm had passed. I thought it had been a dream until I checked my camera and saw the photos. The Twilight Lodge was real, and I think it's still waiting for me. The light handle of my flashlight flashed ominously as I slipped through the narrow opening. The smell of damp earth and stale air filled my nostrils. Behind me I could hear Jake and Chris arguing in a whisper about which way to go. We were already lost. Although none of us wanted to admit it, as the reality of our situation sank into my mind, a chill ran down my spine and had nothing to do with the cold air underground. We were trapped in the depths of the whispering caverns, and the shadows seemed to close in around us. I'm Alex, a 23-year-old geology student with a passion for caving. When my friend suggested exploring the infamous Whispering Caverns as our last adventure before graduation, I accepted without hesitation. The cave system was known for its impressive formations and challenging passageways, but it also had a dark reputation. Local legends told of strange noises, unexplained disappearances, and an otherworldly presence lurking in their deepest chambers. We laugh at the stories, attributing them to superstition and exaggerated imagination. Now standing at a fork in the fork of three identical tunnels, those legends didn't seem tangled anymore. I tell you, we're coming from there, Jake insisted, pointing to the passage on the left. Chris shook his head. No way, man. We just passed through there. It has to be the one on the right. I remained silent, studying our surroundings. Something had felt bad, but I couldn't pinpoint that the rock formations looked, and at the same time, subtly wrong, like a painting in which the artist had altered small details on purpose. Guys, I said, my voice resonating strangely in the confined space, I think we should go back. Let's try to find a point of reference that we both recognize. They turned to look at me, and I saw my own fear reflected in their eyes. We had been down there for hours, much longer by the time we had planned. Our water supply was running low, and the batteries in our flashlights would not last forever. Just as we were about to retrace our steps our way, a reverberatory sound in the cavern at first was faint, barely audible over the dripping water and our breathing, but it increased until it became what sounded like whispers. Here, it is, asked Kai's, his voice tense. We stood motionless, struggling to hear. The whispers seemed to come from all directions, a chaos of indistinct voices that made my skin crawl. It's just the wind, Jake said, but his voice lacked conviction. We all knew there was no wind deep in the cave. As if responding to his words, the whispers intensified now. I could almost make out words, although in a language I didn't recognize. The sound seemed to draw us into the central tunnel. We should check it out, I heard it say, though every instinct was screaming at me to run in the opposite direction. Maybe it's other cavers or a rescue team. Jake and Chris nodded, their pale faces in the dim light of our flashlights. We slowly made our way through the tunnel, he with the whispers increasing with each step. The passage opened into a large chamber, his ceiling lost in the darkness above us. As we illuminated the room with our lights, I let loose a gasping. The walls were covered in strange symbols that glowed faintly with a phosphorescent light. It throbbed to the rhythm of the whispers that had now reached a fever pitch. What the hell is this place? Chris whispered, her voice barely audible over the noise. Before anyone could answer, the ground beneath our feet began to shake. Small stones fell from the ceiling, and I heard Jake scream in alarm. We have to get out of here, I screamed. Turning it, there was rock-solid panic enveloped me as I realized we were trapped. The vibrations intensified, and cracks began to form in the floor. Through them I saw a strange pulsating light. Then, when I noticed that the symbols on the walls were moving, rearranging into new patterns as I watched them hypnotized, they began to form English words. The door opens, the sleeper awakens. A deafening roar filled the chamber, drowning even the whispers. The ground collapsed beneath us, and we fell into a vortex of light and sound. I don't know how long we fell. It could have been a second or centuries. When regained, I was lying on a cold stone floor, in almost total darkness. My flashlight had disappeared, but a faint pulsating glow allowed me to see it enough. As my eyes adjusted, I realized in horror that we were nowhere to be found anymore. The Whispering Caverns I recognized. The chamber we were in was rough, its walls made of a black, glassy substance that seemed to absorb the little light present. I could make out Jake and Chris near me, both unconscious but breathing as I crawled towards them. A movement out of the corner of my eye made me freeze. Something emerged from the shadows. It was tall, at least twice the height of a man, with a body that seemed to flow like smoke where its face should be. There was only a group of luminous points that with a shiver I understood were eyes. Fear paralyzed me as the creature approached. It stopped a few meters away, watching us with its alien eyes. Then to my amazement it spoke. "Welcome, children of the surface," said its voice, resounding in my mind, instead of in my ears. "We have waited a long time for its arrival." I swallowed hard and somehow found my voice. "What are you? Where are we?" The creature's form seemed to ripple as if amused by my confusion. "We are the guardians of the deep, the custodians of the ancient paths, and you are in the heart of the world where the barriers between realities thin." As I spoke, more beings emerged from the shadows surrounding us. Jake and Chris began to move, moaning as they regained consciousness. "For what brought us here?" I asked, trying to hold back the tremor in my voice. "You came on your own," the creature replied, its curiosity, its desire to explore the unknown. "You called us. We just facilitated your journey." Jake was already wide awake, his eyes bulging with terror. "Alex, what's going on? Where are we?" Before I could answer, the being spoke again. "They're at a crossroads, children of the surface. They're at a crossroads, children from the surface. The world above is changing, sickening with the poison of your kind. I offered you a choice." The creature paused, its multiple eyes coming in with an emotion I couldn't decipher. "Stay with us, learn the secrets of the deep, help us keep our balance, or return to your world." But as our emissaries spreading the truth about what lies beneath, I looked at Jake and Chris, seeing my own conflict reflected in their faces. The offer was tempting, to learn the secrets of these entities, to see wonders that no human had ever witnessed, but the thought of never seeing the sun again, of abandoning our families and everything we knew, was unbearable. "We have to go back," I said firmly, surprised by the conviction in my voice. "Our families, our lives, we can't just abandon them." There was a long silence. The being watched us, his eyes shining. With an indecipherable glow he finally nodded. "So it will be, but remember this. Once you have seen beyond the veil, you will never be able to fully return to your old lives. Knowledge will always be with you, calling you back to the depths." Before we could answer, the camera began to swirl around us. I felt an indescribable vertigo, as if we were traversing layer after layer of rock and earth at an impossible speed. And suddenly we were back in the familiar passages of the whispering caverns, blinking before the glow of the rescuers' flashlights. The official story was that we had gotten lost, that we suffered hallucinations due to lack of oxygen and dehydration. Our accounts of glowing symbols and beings made of shadows were dismissed as a shared illusion. But I know the truth. Sometimes in the stillness of the night I still hear the whispers, and in my dreams I see those eyes glowing in the darkness, calling me back to the heart of the world. We came out of the whispering caverns that day, but a part of me will always remain in those depths, wondering about the choice we made and the secrets we left behind. The moment I heard the first scream, I knew this wasn't going to be a normal shift night. Working as a night guard at Oakwood Hospital used to be quiet, but that night the air was charged with a strange energy, a sensation that made my skin tingle. I had no idea I was about to face a horror that would haunt me for the rest of my life. My name is David, and I have worked in security at Hogwood for the last 5 years. It is an old building with a history dating back to the 1920s. As most hospitals with so many years had its share of ghost stories and urban legends, I never gave them much importance, preferring to focus on tangible threats, problematic visitors, disoriented patients trying to escape, that kind of thing. That night's shift began like any other. I made my rounds, talked to the night nurses, and settled into my post, waiting for a quiet night. It was close to 2 in the morning when everything changed. A scream went through the empty corridors, bouncing off the walls in a way that it was impossible to determine its origin. I jumped to my feet with the adrenaline pumping. It wasn't the kind of scream you sometimes heard in a hospital of pain or anguish. It was an absolute pure scream of terror. I picked up the radio as I walked down the hallway. Someone else heard that. Where it came from, there was a moment of static, then a confused response. To hear that everything here is calm, I frowned and I slowed down. I had imagined it, but then I heard it again, fainter, this time, but unmistakable. It seemed to come from the old wing, a section of the hospital that had been closed for months for renovations. Against my better judgment, I decided to investigate. The old wing was a maze of dimly lit corridors and empty rooms, the air permeated with the smell of dust and disinfectant. As the temperature progressed, my breath seemed to drop, turned into little clouds in front of me. Then I saw her, a young woman in a threadbare hospital gown standing at the end of the hallway, her back to me, her long dark hair falling in clumps tangled over her shoulders. "Miss," I called, my voice echoing in the empty hallway. "I shouldn't be here. This area is slowly closed with almost excruciating slowness." She turned to look at me. The cold in the air seemed to intensify, my blood intensifying. She froze when she saw her well for the first time. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, with dark veins visible beneath the surface. But what terrified me the most were her totally black eyes. Two dark voids looking at me as if they were bottomless pits. I took a step back, my training forgotten. In the face of the impossible, the woman advanced towards me with jerky movements, as if each step was an unnatural effort. "Help me," her voice whispered, seeming to come from everywhere. And none at the same time. They're coming. They always come before I could answer. Disappeared, didn't run away, didn't hide in a room, just vanished. I was pinned to the floor, my heart hammered in my chest. My rational mind tried to find a logical explanation. A patient with a rare disease. Maybe she'd wandered to the old wing. But deep down I knew the truth. I'd seen something that I hadn't. I don't know how long I was there, paralyzed by fear. It was the crackle of my radio that finally got me out of the trance. David responds, "Where are you?" I picked up the radio with a trembling hand. "I'm in the old wing. I thought I heard something." "Get out of there now," he ordered, the voice to the other end with an urgent tone. "We have a problem up here. Multiple patients report seeing things, shadows moving through his count, voices in empty rooms. We need all available staff." As if my radio had turned something on, the lights in the hallway started flashing. In the momentary darkness, I saw shapes move at the edges of my vision, distorted in human figures. I ran. I'm not ashamed to admit it. I ran faster than I've ever run in my life, without stopping, until I got out of the old wing and back to the main area of the hospital. But even there I knew something was wrong. The air was heavy with indescribable tension. The corridors were filled with murmurs of patients and staff. Chaos took over the hospital. Patients were hysterical, describing terrifying visions. Some said icy hands had touched them. Others claimed to have seen loved ones who had been dead for years. Staff were trying to contain the situation, but they too had seen things. When dawn began to dawn, things finally took shape. The visions faded. The hospital was left in a state of collective shock. The official explanation was a case of mass hysteria triggered by an alleged gas leak that would have caused hallucinations. It was a convenient, logical story, but I knew the truth. What I had seen in that corridor was not a hallucination. In the following weeks I tried to investigate the hospital's past, looking for any clues that would explain what had happened. I discovered articles. I also found rumors about unethical medical experiments in basements during World War II, but nothing concrete, nothing that fully explained what we had experienced that night. I quit soon after. I couldn't keep walking those halls wondering what else might be lurking in the shadows. Yet the experience never left me. Even now, years later, I avoid hospitals as much as I can, and some nights I wake up to the echo of a whisper in my ear, "Are coming." They always come, trying that it was all a dream. That was my imagination playing tricks on me, but deep down I know the truth. For one night the veil between our world and something else weakened, and what crossed was scarier than I could have ever imagined. I had never told this story. Who would believe me? But I feel the need to write it now, maybe as a warning, because I know that somewhere in the corridors of an old hospital, something. Keep waiting, watching, and sooner or later it will manifest again. The wind howled like a wounded animal as I gripped the steering wheel tightly, trying to see through the snow-covered windshield. This mountain pass was dangerous on the best days, but in the middle of the windscreen, worst snowstorm to drive around here was suicide. I knew I had to find shelter before night fell. It was then that I saw it. A cabin barely visible between the curtain of snow, with a flickering light inside, and although something in my instinct told me to go on, I turned the steering wheel and headed towards it. The cabin seemed to materialize in the snow with a flickering light in one of my old Subaru. I was shaking with every gust of wind, and I knew I couldn't keep driving, or I stopped here, or risked freezing in the mountain. I grabbed my bag, I wrapped myself better in my jacket, and got out of the car, shrinking. Maybe it was the way the light flickered, as if flickering at a strange frequency. Maybe it was the fact that there were no footprints in the snow, not a sign that anyone had recently come in or out. But I had no choice. I climbed the porch steps and banged on the door with my knuckles. "Hello." The wind howled behind me. There was no response. I tried the handle, and surprisingly, it hit easily. The door opened with a creak. "Excuse me." My car was stuck in the snow. Alone, I need to take shelter for a while. I took a step inside. The air in the interior was strangely warm, though I couldn't see any burning fireplaces or signs of heating. The cabin was bigger than it looked from the outside. Antique furniture, walls covered with pictures and framed photographs. Everything looked normal except for one thing. There was no sound. The wind roaring with fury outside was not heard at all in here. Not even my breathing or the sound of my boots on the wooden floor. It was like if the cabin absorbed the noise. A shiver ran down my spine. Something was wrong, very wrong. I turned to get out, but the door was gone. There was no entrance, only a solid wood wall. My pulse shot up. This was not possible. I turned on my heels, trying to control the rising tide of panic. I had to find another way out. I went into the cabin. Each room was stranger than the last. The pictures in the walls were of people with blurred faces. The clocks had no hands, and they blinked them with an irregular rhythm as if they were breathing. Then I saw the door at the end of the corridor. It was different from the others, black, worn wood, and the worst thing was ajar. Something inside me screamed not to open it, not to look, but it was too late because the door opened by itself. The door opened slowly, revealing a darkness that seemed denser than the shadow itself. It was an absolute emptiness, as if beyond that threshold nothing existed. My whole body shuddered with a cold that had nothing to do with the storm outside. Something was waiting for me inside. I couldn't see it, but I felt it. A former patient who had been there since long before I arrived. I took a step back, my heart beating frantically, and then something inside the room breathed a low, deep guttural sound, as if the very air in the room was alive. My first instinct was to run. But where the door I had entered had disappeared, there was no escape. The only way out seemed to be forward, into the darkness. Then the lights in the cabin began to flicker frantically. Shadows on the walls stretched, and I heard it, a hypnotic sweet voice. They see an icy chill. It ran down my spine. It was a familiar voice, my mother, but my mother had died 5 years ago. My legs were shaking. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real, and yet there it was. Come, Alex. My mother's voice was calling me from the darkness. Don't be afraid. I don't know why I did. It may be because curiosity is stronger than fear. Maybe because deep down a part of me wanted to believe it was her. I took a step towards the black door. Then another. Could feel the air inside denser, as if I were entering the eye of a storm. I reached out, and then an invisible force pulled me inward. I fell, not on the ground. Not in one room. I fell into nothingness. Absolute emptiness surrounded me. My mother's voice distorted, transforming into something inhuman, a guttural, rumbling growl that vibrated inside my skull, and then I saw it. Something enormously vast, larger than any creature I could imagine. It had no fixed form. It moved, it twisted, it changed. It had eyes, dozens, maybe hundreds, opening and closing in the darkness, and mouths. So many mouths. Some whispered, some laughed, and some screamed. The terror paralyzed me. I couldn't breathe, I couldn't move. I was trapped, consumed, and then, with impossible force, I was thrown back to the hut. I hit the floor with a roar and jade, trying to catch my breath. I looked around frantically. The black door was still there, but now it was closed, and on its surface there was something that wasn't before. A large footprint, warped, as if something on the other side. I would have tried to get out. A shaky bland escaped my lips. I stood up with difficulty and ran desperately, looking for a way out, and then, as if the cabin had changed its mind, the front door reappeared without a second thought. I slammed it open and staggered out. There were no footprints, no sign that I had ever been there. I got into my car with trembling hands and drove without looking back. I never talked about what happened that night, but sometimes when I see a storm forming in the distance, I feel a chill run through me, because I know it's still there somewhere, waiting for another traveler, waiting for someone desperate enough to get in, and worst of all, I know that if I had taken one more step, I wouldn't have come out.